Ontario, Canada here. Driving home one night around 1 or 2 a.m. see on the side of the road an animal about the size of a horse, pale white but dog-like head and emaciated looking. Creeped out as fuck, never looked back. I experienced this exact same thing in rural Pennsylvania. Its legs looks to be on backwards though, and it crossed the road in front of me. I haven't found much information on them, other than down in Texas they have something similar called striders, but they are black and hairy. Yeah, this thing wasn't moseying around. It was like laying on the gravel at the side of the road, parallel to the road, and it's like I came up behind it because it wasn't facing me. It must have had short hair, because it honestly reminded me of a greyhound. Like grey pale. Black. That's what I saw. It almost glowed in my headlights. I was going along a twisty mountain road at about 2 to 3 a.m. and saw it cross between two fields in front of me close enough that I locked the brakes up. If I would have it at the windshield of my truck, probably would have been around stomach height. Not driving, but I was walking my dog late one night and saw something very similar. I posted a quick doodle of it here on /x/ and had some interesting responses. It was across the street from my apartments, and as soon as cars started driving by it bolted. It was sleek. Most nights than not I will drive down to New Cumberland, Pennsylvania from Lewisberry, Pennsylvania for a cold beer and some darts, and one night in October 2012 was no different. On the return trip, not long after midnight, I was on Route 382 headed east towards Lewisberry. As I was approaching John Brenneman's place up on the right, just before Brenneman Drive, I saw someone walking towards me along the side of the road. True, it was late, but it was rather mild for October, so it wasn't out of the question that someone might be walking along the road. What was odd is that he was quite tall, 6 feet 6 inches or taller, and really thin. In the few seconds I was looking at him, I noticed that he seemed to be dressed all in black, with black pants, a tight black trench coat, very dark skin and short dark hair. He was either limping or having trouble walking. As I debated slowing down, maybe someone had had an accident, he dropped down to all fours and quickly scampered across the road in front of me. He has a face that was, as I said, coal black with a cross between human and canine face. And then, he was gone. When I got home I hadn't really thought much about it, but over the next day or two it really started to give me the creeps. I didn't say anything to anyone for a few days, then told a few close friends. Being self-employed and fearing derision, I was reticent to make much ado about it. Although I have always been an enthusiast of the paranormal, cryptozoology, ghosts and such, I have always been a dyed-in-the-wool skeptic. I can't explain what I saw or begin to postulate what it was. I only know I saw it and it creeps me out. I did some research and the closest I came to a picture was one like the Texas Skinwalker, which I have included for comparison purposes.
The heck is a skinwalker? Navajo myth. Being of evil that can change shape by throwing a skin over himself. This is a story of a guy I met in the woods, and a few friends of his. I can't guarantee anything as to its accuracy. I'm just going on what he told me to be true. Befriend in a couple buddies. Head out on the Highline Trail in Utah's Uintas Mountains for a week. Have enough cars in the group so as to be able to park one at each end of the trail. Everybody is excited to be out in the mountains together. Not long before weird things to start happening. It starts out with things like hiking poles and backpacks end up at opposite sides of camp to where people left them. Everybody's boots are upside down in the morning. They hang their food bags on certain trees at night, but find them tied to certain other trees in the mornings. Most people brush this stuff off as animals, or someone in their group getting a midnight snack. Weirder and weirder shit starts happening. My friend wakes up to find muddy handprints all over the inside of his tent fly, in between the inner tent and the fly. As they're hiking, they lose the trail only to backtrack and find large, freshly cut branches and clever disguise laid over the actual trail. People are starting to think that they're being stalked. What really starts freaking people out is waking up to find their tents rearranged in their campsite. The stakes of the non-freestanding tents look like they're all undisturbed, but the tents are all in different places around camp. Nobody has any idea how their tents could have been all moved around, and in some cases apparently broken down and repitched, with none of them noticing or waking up. Next night, they decide to keep watch in 3-hour shifts. Everyone is on edge. Watchmen get thick branches, tie knives to the ends, and arm themselves with bare mace. The first half of the night, nothing happens. Then it's my friend's turn to stand watch. He's got his camera because he figures the flash can illuminate wide areas if something comes close. It doesn't matter, though, because he falls asleep just before dawn, and nothing happens that night. Next morning, somebody asks him why he was taking pictures the last night. My friend freezes, slowly takes out his camera, checks the memory. There's pictures of everybody in the group sleeping, including himself. By following a creek a little ways upstream, they are able to find the trail, which someone recognizes as being not too far from their campsite. They only have 12 miles to go before they get to the trailhead, but it's early afternoon, and they're doubtful they can finish their trip that same day. Reaching their campsite, they find all of their gear shredded in pieces. Apparently, only one backpack was unharmed. They find where their food had been hung, scooped up as much as they could save from where it was scattered on the ground. Somebody luckily finds the car keys, and they run the rest of the way back, getting lost several times, but reaching the trailhead before dark. When they finally get to the trailhead, everyone is too exhausted to make camp or do any driving, so all 6 of them just pile into the car, lock the doors, and fall asleep. A knock on their window wakes them up early the next morning. It's the police, and the cop wants to know what these people are doing in a closed area. As they tried to explain the situation, the cop tells his own story. The entire entrance to the forest had been closed for days due to abnormal animal activity. My friend is getting suspicious why the police are handling the closure and not the forest rangers. He asks as much. Cop goes quiet and looks away. Very awkward moment, which is interrupted by one of my friend's hiking companions in the car. He notices that there are about a dozen other cars in the parking lot, but they all have flat tires. Everybody gets out of the car, and they realize that their own tires are flat. At this point, the cop comes clean and explains that there's actually a manhunt in the area, but they're not sure what exactly they're dealing with. Lots of dead hikers turned up earlier in the week. My friend remembers the strange photos and gets out his camera to show the cop. The cop's face suddenly goes blank, and he hands back the camera. It's a photo that was taken inside the car the night before. Partially visible in the last photo, which is of my friend's sleeping face, like some kind of party photo where the taker holds the camera at arm's length to get himself in, is the right half of a pure white face with black holes for eyes and a mouth full of sharpened animal-like teeth. It was a Skinwalker, motherfucker. Captures one of them when they go to take a piss. Kills them. Becomes them.
Part 1. Gonna post a story of some shit that's happened to me. Live in South Africa, this happened back when I was 16. The local church organized a youth camp to a place called Dundee, a farm town in South Africa. We're gonna be staying on a farm that gets used for school excursions and shit like that. We get there on Sunday night and everyone is pumped for a good time. Some kids from the local area come camp with us, along with a few kids from other big cities. There's like 62 campers. Girl and boys get split, so no funky business. Us guys spend the night getting to know each other and telling funny stories. Eventually we start telling stories trying to scare the shit out of each other. My one bro tells the guys about the Bloody Mary legend. The local kids are in a pretty remote area, so this creeps the fuck out of them and laugh about it. Back then it was about the time Harry Potter was popular, and being the faggot that I somehow ended trying to learn Parseltongue. I knew a little Latin from some of the hymns, so missed random words and hissed and scared the shit out of everyone. Some of them got so mad they decided to sleep. Then my one bro tells this story about a South African urban legend called the Tokolosh. Apparently it's this guy who basically wanders around haunting people. Once he starts haunting you, he never leaves you alone. He'll come up to you in the middle of the night and stare at you sleep for 3 nights in a row. If you wake up, he kills you. Accounts on how you die vary from him taking your soul to cutting out your heart. Now I might be a black guy in South Africa, but I was raised by my white dad and a black mom who was raised by her Portuguese grandma. I have little knowledge about South African folklore. I laugh it off, but it seems everyone but me knows about the Tokolosh and they are visibly creeped out. We all go to bed right then. Part 2. The next day some of the guys tell their girlfriends about what we did that night, and it seems the girls did something similar. We get split into groups, 4 girls, 4 boys. We get told we're gonna be doing some activities, and we have to compete against each other. Fuck that, we just want to have fun. That afternoon my bro needs the restroom and the closest one has no working lights. He goes in and starts doing his business. I wait 3 minutes and then decide to prank him. I turn the water on in one of the basins and go to the door and scream Bloody Mary twice. Bro flips his shit and runs out pants down, and I start laughing at him. I was an asshole. He laughs it off and goes back to finish, but I do this to him 3 more times. I was a real asshole. He won't go with me afterwards anymore. That evening we're all sitting around a campfire and telling more stories. I do the parcel tongue thing again and scare some of the girls. We laugh. One of the counselors tells us a story about the Tokolosh and claims that some farm workers living nearby had died because of him. Recently. We call bullshit. He takes us to a fenced clearing about 100 meters from the dorms and there are fucking graves there. We see 4 graves that look new. We nope the fuck out of and collectively decide to go to bed. The next morning some of the girls complain that I was crawling around their ceiling, my parcel tongue impersonation, but I was legitimately asleep, and the counselor lets them know that there is no space in the ceiling to crawl around and it's impossible to get from the boys' dorm to the girls' dorm because you have to go through the counselor's rooms. Then someone asks, if it wasn't Rick, then who was it? We're all starting to freak out. Part 3. That whole day we're all just joking about it, but the local kids don't want to talk about what's happening. But finally one of them tells us that this is how some of the Tokolosh stories go. Then he asks if any of us have messed with any type of ritual. I tell them that I did the Bloody Mary thing but never finished it and kept swapping it out with Biggie Smalls and some other stuff just as a joke. He says it might have had an effect but doubts it. We get told that we have to pack our sleeping gear because we're gonna move locations after climbing a large hill the next day. That night one of the guys wakes up feeling cold and wants to close the window, but none of the windows are open. He looks out and sees a shadow moving near the small cemetery. He flips his shit and wakes us up. We see the shadow moving around and nope so hard we actually start praying. I'm not religious, but fuck that I prayed like a choir boy. The shadow moves in the woods and we basically huddle till morning. We were so scared we were pissing in buckets so we wouldn't have to go to the restrooms. Morning finally comes and nobody want to talk. I ask one of the girls why they are so quiet, and it seems they've been hearing the parcel tongue-like voice. We tell them about the shadow and it seems they heard the voices around 1:26 till 2:56. We saw the shadow at 3:05 and it left at 3:13. We're all shitting ourselves but start chilling out because we remember we're moving camp locations. Part 4. We're gonna ride a tractor pulling a bus-like trailer to the base of the hill, but it breaks down halfway there. We leave it and walk the rest of the way. We see the tractor heading back and realize it was a prank to make us walk and stop being lazy. Fuck it, we just want to get this over with and go back so we can move. The hill takes so much longer to climb than we expected, but we push on. It takes 7 hours for the whole group to make it. At the top there are tents set up. Our sleep gear is there. They tell us that we're gonna spend the night there. Fuck that. We want to nope all the way home, but it's dark and cold. Even if we get back, there's nowhere else to go. A few of the guys get together and come up with a SHTF plan. We decide that we're gonna grab girls from outgroup and bail all the way downhill on our own. Fuck the rest of the group. Planning it out calms us down and we even start joking around again. We're all chilled after being there a few hours and sitting around a campfire. One of the camp cooks tells us that his son died recently. We ask about it and turns out his son is one of the people who was allegedly killed by the Tokolosh. Well, so much for calming down. We decide that going to bed is the best way to go. Part 5. We go to bed at 9. At like 1, 3 of us wake up and it's super fucking cold. I look up and realize that I'm not in the tent. My cushion, sleeping bag and me are out in the open. Ha ha ha, real funny guys. We move our stuff back into the tent, but the other guys have no idea why we're outside. We go back to sleep, but an hour later same thing happens, but this time there are 7 of us including girls outside. I realize that it's only us who made the SHTF plan. We told no one, not even the girl we were gonna save. WTF. As we're taking our stuff back in, we see a shadow moving a girl out of her tent. I want to nope out of there, but I can't move. My bro starts yelling and that makes me start yelling too. The girl wakes up and screams. The shadow run into the woods. Counselors decide to call for transport so we can leave, but the tractor is broken for real now. One of my bros asks about the plan, but I tell him that the plan blows. Why would we risk going off by ourselves into the dark? Besides, things aren't at SHTF yet. We decide to arm ourselves with sticks and rocks. No one has any weapons. We are all too scared to sleep. We see a shadow moving in the distance, but it didn't come closer than that. We also hear the parcel tongue-like voice till near dawn. At first light, we pack up in silence and nope our way down to base camp, call the guy who brought us here, and tell him we all want to go home. That shadow was the closest thing to something X I'd ever seen. It kept changing, and for some reason I have trouble recalling what its face looked like. I later heard that those who see a Tokolosh never remember its face, just a shadow. I avoid dark alleys and never go Innawoods. I don't know what it was, but I don't want to find out. Why did it take us out the tents? Why just us? Who'd come up with the plan that the girls we were gonna save?
I've never told this story to anyone, and I don't really intend to tell it again. I have a pounding migraine today, and this thread has kept me good company as I've drifted in and out. I don't really like talking about this time in my life, but I want to contribute. When I was 10 to 12, I lived with my mother. We were below poverty level poor. We lived up in the mountains around Santa Cruz, California. My mother had a friend that owned a large bit of property up there, and he let us stay in a trailer up there. Our trailer was very small, and was right beside a garden. A chain link fence ran around the garden, to keep the dog the owner had out, along with other animals. Deer and things are very common in the area. Also inside the fenced area was a single room. It was built like a tiny house, but it was only a single room on the inside. This room had electricity, and since our actual trailer didn't, I spent a lot of my time in there. I was super into video games. Sorry, this story will be fairly long. I am bad at not writing a lot. I just want to tell it right, if this will be the only time taking on a random name so I can be easily identified in this thread. There was one thing you should know right now. This small fenced-in area was only a small part of the property, but most of it was heavily forested. Also, I refused to leave the fenced area, because the owner's dog had been mistreated by children in the past and was very sketchy towards me all the time. If I was alone, it would bite at me, even through the fence. The fence was tall, at least 7 feet high, and wasn't movable though. So as long as the gate was closed I was safe. That said, tiny bit of the property. There is no one else around for miles and miles. Now, I tell you all this, because I think it is important you understand what kind of scene this was before I really get into this story. We have a fenced-in location that seems fairly safe. It contains a trailer and a single room with power that is not connected to the trailer. Nothing else around for miles. My mom's van is parked out in front of the gate to the fenced-in area, and a single unpaved road runs from this garden for about a mile to the main house. Now then, I brought friends up there to sleep over here and there. We all thought it was pretty cool, you know? Like camping out, sort of. Besides, we would get our own room to stay in, to play video games all night long. It was like a dream come true. The downside was simple. When it got dark out, it got really dark out. No city around, and the trailer would not be lit up. There was no bathroom to use in the room, and you would have to walk through the dark garden in order to get to the trailer to use it. Odd things happened out here from time to time. It was always something that could be somewhat easily explained away though. Noises like people working at night sometimes. Or once me and a friend were sitting out in the garden, and we saw a shadow as big as a small bear bound up a tree, but the tree didn't shake like there was weight on it. The dog also creeped me out, but you know. Angry dog, I was a kid. It happens. Now, I am a scaredy cat. I always have been. To be honest, I don't know why I even come to /x/. I have trouble walking through a lit house if I am all alone. My friends, however, tend to be more outgoing. Just the kinds of people I get along with. This time I had a friend over. His name was Jacob. We were staying up all night and playing Sonic the Hedgehog 3, and Knuckles, on my Sega Genesis on a ratty old television. We started playing as the sun went down, and by the time we were finishing up the game it was about 2 a.m. That's when we heard it. We turned off the game getting ready to find something else to play. There was a rumbling in the woods behind the room we were in. Like somebody was rolling something really heavy around. We hadn't heard it before because the noise from what we were playing was loud. Immediately I had goosebumps. Jacob was not really worried about it, but it's not like there was someone else's house or yard right over there. It was forest for miles, and it sounded like someone was constructing something or some shit. Dragging or rolling something really big. Eventually Jacob convinced me to just play some more games. I agreed on the condition that we turn the volume down so we could hear if something happened. We started playing, and I didn't even notice the noise stop because I was getting engrossed. A couple hours later, Jacob said he had to use the bathroom. I was feeling fine by then, so I was fine when he left to the trailer to relieve himself. He was taking a while, so eventually I decided I was going to go check on him. Besides, I could use the bathroom and grab a snack while I was at it. I opened the door to leave, and he was just standing at the doorway. Right outside the door, facing it. Scared the shit out of me. I asked him what he was doing and he just stood there. blocking the exit. I realized he must have sneaked up to the door, because I could hear him walk away from the room, but I hadn't heard him walk back up to it. It was super quiet out there without the noises of the city. I should have been able to hear. He refused to say anything or respond. He just stood there. I told him he was really creeping me out. But it was not unlike him to try and scare me like this. Finally, I decided to just go to the trailer and use the bathroom myself. Partially because I knew my mother was asleep in there. I told him what I was doing, then moved past him. When I pushed him out of my way a little, his skin felt freezing to the touch. I jumped a little. But it was a cold night and he had been standing out there for like 30 minutes. So I figured that was to be expected. I walked as quickly as I could over to the trailer. He followed me, like right on my tail. It was unnerving. I joked a little, saying that he already surprised me by scaring me at the door. The joke is over already. Finally I got to the trailer, and walked in. He didn't follow, just stayed at the doorway. I checked on my mom, who was fast asleep, then turned to go into the bathroom. Now, it being a porta potty, we keep the bathroom door shut because it smells bad. When I reach for the door and try to open it though, it's locked. A nervous voice came from behind the door. I'm in here. I quickly turned to look at Jacob, but the door was still open and there was nothing there but pitch black night. I freeze in terror. I would have heard the bathroom door open if he had come in behind me and gone that way. There is no way to do it quietly, it creaks like a motherfucker. I yelped so loud that my mom woke up startled. I stared at the doorway, unable to bring myself to move a muscle. She got up, walked over there and looked out. Not seeing anything, she closed the door and asked me what was wrong. By now, Jacob was coming out of the bathroom and acting perfectly normal, but a bit confused. I explained what had happened. Jacob said he was just taking a long time in the bathroom, basically. Neither of them believe me at all, no matter how much I insist. My mom is sure that I just got sleepy and imagined it. Jacob thought I was trying to prank him. So my mom gets out a big flashlight and walks us back to the room. She tells us to go to sleep. Then leaves and goes back to bed herself. Now, this room doesn't have any windows or anything. So, after a while I calm back down a little. I'm telling myself that my mom was right. I must have had like a waking dream or something. Jacob insists he was in the bathroom the whole time, and I'm inclined to believe him because there is just no way to really get around without being heard. So, I settle down. I'm a little rattled, but I am thinking I can just sleep it off through the night. Suddenly, the dog starts going nuts. Right behind us. The room is up against the fence, so the dog must have been like, right behind the room on the other side. I felt like I jumped so high I was surprised I didn't hit the roof. Jacob's laughing at me like, ha, dog barking at a squirrel or some shit, and you are shitting yourself. It keeps going like that for a long time though. Suddenly the barking stops and gets replaced by whimpering. We hear the dog run away. There are about 45 seconds of silence before we hear something new. A small scratching sound on the back wall of the room. We both try to be as silent as we can. Eventually it stops. After 5 or so minutes of silence, Jacob decides to be brave. He insists he is going to go get my mother up, tell her something crazy is going on and we're going to go from there. With some kind of divine adult protection, no doubt. I wish he wouldn't leave me alone, but there is no way I am going out there. Never ever. He arms himself as best he can. With a tennis racket we had in the room with us. Then he takes a couple deep breaths and opens the door and dashes out. I close it as quick as I can behind him. In less than 30 seconds, I hear a scream. Not long after the door flies open, and he comes back in looking pale as a ghost. He's breathing like he just ran a marathon. His eyes look as big as dinner plates. I ask what is going on like 4 times before he finally starts getting words out. He tells me he walked out there and as he was walking through the garden as quick as he could he saw my mom. Just standing there. He tried to talk to her, but she stared at him with a blank expression. Getting super creeped out because of what happened to me earlier, he took a couple more steps towards her telling her that he thought something was in the woods. Suddenly, her face turned to an awkward smile. Then he realized something terrible. He hadn't noticed sooner because of the darkness and how much of a hurry he had been in. She was on the other side of the fence. Now, the door to this room does not lock. And as I explained earlier, this room had no windows. He had been trying to move stuff in front of the door as he told this story, and by the end I was helping him. In retrospect, whatever was harassing us seemed to be averse to actually entering the room or the trailer, because the Jacob one didn't come in either time he could have. And this room was not sturdy. Either way. We stacked everything we could against the door. Thinking somehow that like cartoons this would totally definitely keep the creature out. For the rest of the night we heard scratches coming from all around the room. I cried. Jacob looked like his mind had left his body with fear. At one time I thought I heard it speak too. I heard from right next to where I was resting against the wall, in my mother's voice, quietly. The same exact phrasing and intonation she had used earlier in the night. "What's wrong?" Followed immediately by "Go to sleep. The sun must have come up eventually." The scratching eventually stopped. We heard my mom come to get us, this time actually hearing footsteps. We absolutely refused to leave the room. My mom had to go get the property owner, and have him take the door off. When we saw that it was actually her, I burst into tears again. We never had any experiences like these again, and eventually moved away. But that night still haunts me. I still refuse to go out at night unless I am with a bunch of people, and I will never ever live in the woods again. Anyway, hope you all enjoyed hearing about this. If you want to make an image and repost it, feel free. I probably won't tell this again though. Thanks for listening. What's wrong? Followed immediately by "Go to sleep." Aw fuck, I'm shivering. The worst part was it was a completely different intonation. Kind of like taking 2 different sentences out of 2 different scenes in a TV show, of the same person talking and then clipping them together. Ugh. Words cannot describe how fucking eerie it was. If I was not all drugged up on pain meds due to this migraine right now, I would be beside myself having to even talk about this.
I have a story. A few, actually. I didn't really think much of these, until recently. When I was about 12, I lived in Georgia. I lived on the coast, near Savannah, on one of the islands out there. The island had its own grocery store, a few drive-ins, 2 gas stations, and some odds and ends stores. 5-ish miles away was an island with a Walmart, and we could go to a third island or Savannah for anything else. Most of the island, though, was marshland and woods, in addition to housing developments. Most of the housing developments were newer, 20 years, but the neighborhood I lived in was older and thus, poorer than the others. I had a small group of friends, and my friends and I used to go exploring the woods and marshes. It's worth noting that I'm not from the South, and that I've been homeschooled most of my life due to constant moving, parents' jobs. This made me sort of an outsider, with my good of boys, and girls, friends, and although I remember everything about them and knew a ton about them, I really doubt any of them remember me at all, and none of them cared enough to learn much about me. I was that guy, and an outsider with the group. This is important to remember, when it comes to my stories. The first story took place towards the end of summer. This is technically the second story, order-wise, but it's probably best told first. I caught a head cold and spent 3 days sleeping non-stop in my room and only told my best friend, Hank, this over the phone. The weather had cooled down a lot, but it was still warm even at night, so we had taken to camping a lot in the woods near our houses, and sometimes further from home, because it was perfect weather for that. While I was sick, my friends went camping without me. What happens now is a retelling of what H, and another friend, his cousin, Andy, told me after I got better and left my house. Hank, Andy, Hank's girlfriend Michelle, and 3 of their mutual friends had been hanging out all day, and decided last minute to camp in the woods near Hank's house. So, they pitched a few tents right inside the woods, nearish to a pond that was between his house and the woods, and got to goofing around. Shortly after dark, they heard loud splashing in the pond, like someone was swimming late at night, but didn't bother to go and check it out as it wasn't out of the question that someone would be swimming that late out there. A few minutes later though, one apparently showed up at the campsite, soaking wet and acting kind of off. Apparently T didn't say anything. I just came up, sat down near the fire, and started watching people, really awkwardly. Hank ends up asking me if I'm feeling alright, and T told him I was fine. I just felt lonely and decided to join them, and his mother told me where he was. Now, only he knew I had been sick, and he didn't apparently want to bring it up because Andy was a major germaphobe, so he just sort of shrugged it off and they went on with their evening to the best of their abilities, while T sat there, not talking, just watching them. After a while, T dried off, and both Hank, Andy, and everyone else there told me I started stinking, and I got the creative nickname of Stinky because of this, like a dead animal. Michelle started gagging from it apparently, and everyone jokingly told me to go take a shower. So, T got up, walked out of the woods in front of them, and Hank, Michelle and Andy followed me, thinking they'd hurt my feelings, only to see me calmly walk into the pond until I was up to my waist, dive in the rest the way, come back up a bit later, and walk back out. All without saying anything. It's worth noting that I'm not a good swimmer, and I hate diving due to a fear of inhaling water and choking, so the chances of me doing that, especially fully clothed, are pretty fucking slim. After that, T apparently sat back down, and resumed being awkward. When I started smelling again after drying off, they kindly decided not to bring it up, although Michelle told me later T smelled like I was rotting, and she kept moving further from me because of it. Time goes by, and everyone decides to go to bed. Aside from me saying I'm fine, I've apparently said nothing and they've basically forgotten I'm there. Hank tells me to go home. He said he was basically insisting, because no one wanted to share a tent with me. But I refused, and Andy and another friend, Corey, decided to share a tent with me. So they go in, and apparently had to call me into the tent repeatedly. And once I did go in, I just laid down on the floor, facing the wall, nothing under me. Due to the stink, apparently neither of them could get to sleep very easily, and according to Corey, TD constantly turned my head, really oddly, and watched them. This went on until about 5 a.m., when I suddenly got up. Standing as high as I could in the tent, walked out, and that was it. They didn't see me again until about 36 hours later, when I left my house finally. Although it probably isn't that spooky, I know I didn't go out there. I've tried shrugging it off as a joke or me being delusional, but I'm really pretty damn sure I didn't go out there at all. I was sick, and I'm a big baby when I'm sick. Hank even told me it was weird that I wasn't bitching about having felt bad, and that I wasn't harassing Andy over his germ issues, and I clearly remember doing nothing but sleeping, playing video games, looking at porn on shitty-ass dial-up and watching Sci-Fi Channel. In addition, my room was 3 stories up and if I'd left it, I would have woken up my parents, who wake really damned easily, had they been asleep when I supposedly headed out there, and they weren't. I remember my mom coming into my room to watch TV with me at around that time. But, on the other hand, I doubt my friends were smart enough to have an elaborate lie like that, and that they'd care enough to tell it, and they seemed very sincere. That, and Hank's mom later confirmed that I had, in fact, stopped by and asked where they were, and that she'd noted I smelled awful and seemed off, but assumed it was because I was sick and hadn't bathed. His mom and mine, who had been friends, had a major falling out arguing over whether or not I'd showed up there, and none of my friends ever believed me. I never thought much of it, figured it was a mean joke or something, until recently. This is probably tied to an earlier event that had happened over the summer. Over the summer, we found in the woods an area that had been converted into a paintball fort. Lots of elaborate tunnels/trenches and a few sheds and buildings. It was all really cool, but apparently abandoned. Some of it was flooded, for example, and we spent a good few afternoons playing out there, even though it was always sort of unnerving. You felt watched, you know? A good example is, I remember Michelle joking that some big burly guys could pop out from the tunnels, kill us, and kidnap her. She did it sort of nervously, like you do when you're trying to make yourself feel better by joking about your fears. One afternoon we headed out there on our bikes and were goofing around, pretending to be soldiers or something. We did this for hours, Andy, Michelle, Hank, Corey, and a few other people. It got dark out, and I found myself alone in one of the trenches when I started to hear splashing from one of the submerged tunnels. I figured someone had fallen in or been pushed in, and didn't think much of it. A few minutes later, Corey jumped into the trench with me. Now, if someone else was an outsider, it was him. He was fat, annoying, and weird. So what happened next wasn't that out of character for him, although it still made me uncomfortable. He came up beside me, and just sat there and watched while smiling way too much. I tried to carry on with the game, especially since I was the drill sergeant. I'd hit puberty early, so my voice was fucking deep and they picked me for it, but he was just distracting as shit and weirding me out. Finally, I just locked eyes with him and just tried to stare him down. He didn't blink, didn't move, didn't do anything, just looked back at me, smiling. And then I realized he was soaking wet. Part of me, I remember, was worried someone had tried to drown him and made him literally retarded, but about then he reached out, put both hands on my shoulders, gripped me as tightly as he could, I had bruises, and just stared, smiling as broadly as he fucking could. And then he let go, got up, and left. He did it for maybe 15 seconds, any longer and I'd have fucking screamed, and then just left. Nothing said. I just sat there, bewildered and a bit frightened, and I remember realizing that he was fucking freezing. It was hot and humid out still, my shirt was stuck to my back from sweat and I felt greasy the entire summer. But he was freezing. I figured he was from the water, got out, and tried to follow him. He was nowhere to be seen. I went in a trench with Andy and a couple other people, and carried on for a bit, but they realized I wasn't really in the game anymore, and we stopped playing a bit later. I didn't realize it then, but I realize it now. Corey was dry when we got on our bikes and left. I think I either didn't think about it, or thought he just dried fast in the heat, and never mentioned any of it to anyone, as he was a bit weird in general. We didn't play out there again, though. My last story happened a bit after the second, close to Halloween. We'd all gotten cheap Halloween masks at Walmart, and decided one night to play tag outside while wearing them. We did that for a few hours. It was actually more like a tag/hide-and-go-seek combo, and it took a while to finish playing. I remember clearly though that there were 6 of us out there, everyone mentioned, plus Michelle's friend, and that at multiple times I saw a 7th person wearing a mask we didn't have. I figured it was someone switching masks until later, when I realized no one had a mask like that. I then sort of decided not to mention it, 1, because I figured it was this weird girl who lived down the street, who actually would have been too short, and 2, because I didn't want to spook anyone. Nothing really scary happened, we'd just be running and I'd see them running the opposite direction and go hiding, or something like that. It was just weird. Actually, stuff where we'd come up with one extra happened occasionally, but no one ever really thought anything more than we miscounted.
Alright, well /x/ I'm going to go ahead and type my Goatman story. I really didn't know what a Goatman was until I saw some of the stories about it here. So here is a bit of backstory. Back in 2012 we always had bonfires every night. I'm in the Marine Corps Reserve, so while I'm home I work as an Ohio State Trooper. Anyways, a bunch of my buddies and I were having a bonfire. We got everyone at my house around 7 p, then loaded them up into our vehicles. One was a Chevy Suburban, a Jeep Wrangler and a Ford 350. The spot where we have our bonfire was a mile back on my land. There's this dirt path we take down to the cabin. It starts out as going in between 2 fields, then through the woods, then dead ends at our cabin, which overlooks a creek that eventually dumps into the Scioto River. We had about 24 people packed into the 3 vehicles, and shit, the Suburban is mine. So we set off. Driving through the woods wasn't a big deal. But as soon as we got to the area I stepped out of my vehicle and could smell this god-awful smell, death. It smelled like death, like an animal of some sort was rotting in the woods somewhere. Everyone else said they could smell it too. I didn't think nothing of it, maybe a dead deer or something that someone shot and couldn't find. It was the end of September, so hunting season had started. I started the fire and didn't think too much of the smell. We all eventually got used to it. We played beer pong and had a generator going to power the cabin. So my friend of mine Ryan had been telling me that the girl I had brought with me kept asking shit about me to him, saying how much of a gentleman I was, so I knew that night I was going to get laid. Fuck yes. Anyways, the fire was dying down, so Ryan was going to get wood with a few buddies of mine. I had them take a radio with them to radio me if they needed help. The fire started getting real low. It had been about 30 minutes since they had left. "Hey, where the fuck you faggots at?" I asked over the radio. "Dude, chill, I'm on my way," Ryan responded. They came back later with a fuck ton of wood, got the fire going again, then eventually it started to get late. People wanted to start going home, so after everyone left only 8 of us remained. The girl I liked, Sarah, Ryan, David, another guy, and 3 other girls. David, the other guy, and the girls were wasted as fuck and were all flirting with each other. I continued to chill at the fire with Sarah and Ryan talking about random shit. Started to get real late. Around 2 a.m. is when the 3 girls, David, and the other guy went to lay down in the cabin. Sarah and I stayed outside and talked for a while. Eventually we started making out. I stopped when I heard this cracking sound outside. I looked over and could make out a figure walking around near the tree line. "Hey you, what are you doing over there?" I asked. "Dude, chill, I'm on my way," the figure responded. It sounded like Ryan, but I swore Ryan had been in the cabin. Maybe he had walked out when I was occupied, but he didn't make sense. "What?" I asked. "Dude, chill, I'm on my," it responded again. My hair started to raise up on my neck. "The fuck?" Sarah responded. "Sarah, go inside and wake up everyone," I responded. She didn't hesitate. I walked over to my SUV and popped the trunk and grabbed an AR-15. For some reason I was shaking, and the death smell was back again. "What the fuck?" I whispered to myself, shoving the mag into the rifle and sending a round into the chamber. I walked around the SUV to where I saw the figure in the woods and couldn't see it. About this time Ryan walked out of the cabin and looked at me like I was fucking stupid. "Dude, why do you have a gun?" he asked. "Were you out in the woods?" I asked him. He told me he had just woken up and had no idea what I was talking about. I told him to take everyone back to their cars and come back with a gun. He got everyone into my SUV and drove off. I sat there by the fire for a while, looking around me. I had a spotlight by my side, the 1,000,000 candle-watt power ones. I couldn't help but thinking it was someone playing a trick on me, but living 8 miles away from a prison you can't really be too sure. The death smell was starting to get almost repugnant. I felt almost like gagging. I heard something walking through the woods again. I grabbed the spotlight and stood up. I waited for a moment, then I saw it again. The figure walked out of the woods and stood there looking at me. I flipped on the light at it. Its back was turned towards me, staring into the woods. "Hey, I got a fucking gun. You might want to tell me who the fuck you are before I lay your ass out right now." Not a single word came out of the person's mouth. "Motherfucker." I started to walk closer. "Dude, why do you have a gun?" the person asked. "Because I stopped mid-sentence. I started to think about what it said, and what Ryan said. It was mimicking Ryan. It repeated it again. This time it sounded just like Ryan. I raised the rifle and sighted in on the guy. "Ryan?" I asked. Its neck shifted a bit, then twitched its whole body. It looked unnatural. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something about the man looked wrong. I heard music playing in the background and I could see headlights coming through the woods. "Who are you?" I asked. The figure turned around and looked at me. Its facial features were off. It looked like the other guy that was with Ryan, but its voice sounded just like Ryan's, and it stared at me with its mouth gaped open. "Who the fuck are you?" I shouted, flipping my rifle off safe. Something in the fire snapped and made a loud noise, so I flipped around to see what was behind me, then snapped back to where the person was standing. It was gone. "Fuck!" I shouted, looking around for him. About this time Ryan was parking the Suburban and getting out and putting a pistol in his back waistband. "Dude, what's going on?" he asked. I started to fill him in on everything, then asked him if everyone was with him. He told me everyone in the cabin was in that SUV, the other guy, Sarah, and the 3 girls. We sat by the fire and started waiting. The death smell had went away for the time being. It was around 4 a.m. now. Sunlight should be coming in just a few hours. At that time the death smell had came back, this time stronger than ever. To the point Ryan gagged and almost threw up. I got up and looked around, waiting to see the figure again. A few moments passed, then I could see something on the ground, coming out of the woods. I turned on my spotlight and shined it at the figure. The man, who I had seen before, was on the ground rolling around. "What the fuck is that?" Ryan asked, pulling his pistol out. We both stared at the man roll around for a good 20 minutes, then stopped and lay there on the ground. The fire outside illuminated the figure through the window on the door. I could see it standing there, twitching. Sunrise started to come. I could see the figure walk away from the cabin. I ran up and opened up the door and walked outside. By this time the sun was starting to come up, but it was still hard to see anything outside except for the man. The man was walking towards the woods, twitching and shaking. "Hey!" I shouted, drawing my rifle on the man. The figure stopped, and looked at me. I fired a round straight into its head. I seen the man drop like a rock on the ground and start twitching. "Fuck you!" I shouted and kept a beat on him, waiting for the twitching to stop. What happened next I couldn't explain. The man stood up and started walking to the woods like nothing happened. I lowered my rifle and watched as he made it to the tree, lean and turn around and look at us. I didn't see any wound from him, nothing. His face was completely untouched. The death smell went away. I couldn't smell it anymore. The man smiled at us and walked into the woods again. By that time we ran to the SUV, got in and got the fuck out of Dodge. We never spoke of what happened to anyone in fear they'd think we were mental. I've been back to the place countless times now, but I cannot seem to smell the death smell or see anything unusual anymore. I'm not sure if the Goatman/Skinwalker/ghost thing has gone away or it's moved somewhere else, who knows. I've been reading all of the Goatman stuff being posted around these days, and I find them pretty enjoyable. They're a nice change of pace from the usual on this day at this time do this and scary stuff happens booga booga type of creepypasta that's been passing for OC these days. I've been through most of the good, frequently reposted ones. I always assumed that, like anything on the internet, they were works of fiction. But I was reading one recently. It was about a group of kids on a camping trip, that sort of set something off in me. As I was reading it, it brought back some pretty disturbing memories of an experience I'd had a long time ago that was remarkably similar. I'm not describing it as a repressed memory that was awoken by a story online or anything silly like that. It was never repressed. It was just a disturbing thing that happened to myself and some friends, on a camping trip. We told people back then, quite a few, but it's a pretty odd story, now that I make myself remember it all, so nobody believed us. Nothing really life-changing occurred, and I've long fallen out of touch with the other people involved, so over the course of 12 odd years, it had sort of fallen to the back of my brain. Until I read a creepypasta that was way too close for comfort. The phrase "chills down the spine" doesn't even begin to describe how I felt as the story I was reading made me relive something I'd given up thinking about for over a decade. I'm going on 30 now, and this all happened during my college years. Anyway, enough setup. Here's my story, and I'm gonna give it to you with as many details as I can remember. All names have been changed. It was summer, 2001. I can't remember exactly, but it was probably June, maybe July. I wasn't taking any summer classes that year, and neither was my best friend John, who had been my best buddy since middle school. We went to a southern college that's known for football and partying, but there's a few of those, and that's as specific as I'll get. John and I decided that it'd be fun to go camping. The weather that weekend was gonna be relatively cool for summer, so I prodded my not very outdoorsy girlfriend Lauren into coming along, and John got his girlfriend Lisa on board too. Now Lauren and I had been going out for almost 2 years, so we were pretty close. John had only been dating Lisa for a month at most, and Lauren and I didn't know her very well. It seemed like they were getting serious, so we figured it'd be a good chance to get more closely acquainted. Anyway, John's family is pretty country. They all fish and hunt and camp all the time. They also owned a boat, just a little fiberglass skiff with a center console. We decided that it'd be pretty cool to take the boat out offshore a bit, into salt water, mind you, because there were lots of small islands nearby that we could have to ourselves for the weekend. The island we decided on is known by 2 names. The first is what you'll generally see on charts or maps, and that's Osprey Island. There's probably 100 Osprey Islands out there, so I'm not too worried about anybody figuring out which one I'm talking about. That being said, all the locals called it Crab Key. Once it was part of a small archipelago, but all of the other islands around it had washed away in a hurricane back in the 80s. So Crab Key was a cool little island, sand, obviously, with lots of pine trees and low scrub. It wasn't very big, but it was big enough that from one end, you certainly couldn't see through the woods to the other side. It was probably 2 miles long at the most, and only a few thousand feet wide. We loaded up the boat with our tents, sleeping bags, a couple of coolers. My older brother bought us some beer, which was pretty exciting at the time, and other necessities, and set out on Friday afternoon. Crab Key wasn't far offshore, so we got there with plenty of daylight left. We just ran the skiff up on the sand. It was high tide, and since the boat was pretty light we could push it out into the surf easily. John tossed the anchor out onto the beach anyway, just to be safe. John and I had been to the island a few times before, always during the day, to fish from shore or just explore a bit, so we knew to pull the boat up near a trail that led into the palmettos. We grabbed the gear and started hiking on in. Like I said, the island wasn't very thick, so it was only about 1/3 of a mile or so from where we beached to the spot we were planning on setting up camp. Now, in hindsight, I really regret the spot we decided to post up, but at the time, we didn't think twice about it. You see, the island had been inhabited a long time ago, by Indians. I can't tell you the name of the tribe, that's not what I studied in school, but there were actually quite a lot of Indian tribes throughout the southeastern US in the past, and a lot of them lived on the coast. One of the common archaeological features they left behind are called oyster mounds. Basically, it's exactly what it sounds like. They ate a lot of oysters, and oysters have shells. When Indians lived in one place for a long time, they tended to make huge piles of the old oyster shells, so that's what people had found there in the middle of Crab Key. This mound wasn't huge. As an uneducated person, I'd suspect that the tribe that lived on the island probably didn't live there full time. Like I said, it wasn't far offshore, so it might have been a seasonal settlement. Anyway, the mound was about 7 feet high and big enough that the 4 of us, holding hands, only got maybe 1/4 of the way around the perimeter. It was in the center of a clearing, and it seemed like a cool place to camp, so that's where we set up. Now, like I said, I don't know much about the Indians that made the mound. According to the older kids I knew, like our elder siblings, back in the old days when they were young, you could still sometimes find neat little artifacts out on Crab Key, like arrowheads or pottery shards. but apparently so many generations of teens had gone out to the island to drink or screw that all the cool stuff had been found. I know we never saw any relics other than the shells. We basically set up camp right next to the mound. John and I each had our own little dome tent, so it was essentially just 2 tents around a fire pit we dug and the coolers. Pretty bare bones. It was very early summer dusk, maybe 8 o'clock when we finished up our preparations. We had a big pile of fallen pine boughs and a fire going, we had the tents up, and John and Lisa had already popped a couple of Bud Lights. We were just about to settle in for a night of underage drinking when Lauren realized she had left her inhaler in the boat. Understand that Lauren had pretty bad asthma. It wasn't bad pollen season, at least, but she still didn't like to fuck around, especially on an island, a good 3 hours away from an emergency room or nebulizer, so we had to make sure her rescue inhaler was handy. Being the man, I told her I'd go get it, but she insisted she wanted to tag along. I was fine with that, as I figured it'd give us some alone time, so we set off down the trail to shore. It took less than 10 minutes to stroll from the campsite back to shore. We grabbed her inhaler from the console in the boat, along with her cell phone. None of us had a signal, but whatever, I tried to put some moves down and get something going. But I didn't get any further than second base before she suddenly said she was feeling creeped out and wanted to head back to camp. I sighed and accepted it. Like I said, she was not an outdoorsy kind of girl. It was edging toward dark, and it was utterly quiet out there except for a few bug chirps and the lapping of the waves. We get about halfway back, right at the point where we can't see the shore or camp, and it's pretty dim under the trees. Lauren was wearing a t-shirt over a bikini, so to be honest, I was just watching her butt the entire walk back. All of a sudden she stops and tums around, her face all scrunched up. Just as she starts to open her mouth, the smell hits me too. Now, I've read all the Goatman stuff, and it's always described as a weird coppery smell. This wasn't anything like that. A lot of times it's hard to describe a weird smell, but this one was pretty clear. Cutbo and death. It was as if that fat kid we all knew in school, who didn't shower or understand what deodorant was, had found a dead raccoon on the side of the road and rolled around in it. Lauren is moaning, "What the fuck is that?" And I'm trying to take shallow breaths and not look like a pussy for gagging in front of her. I look around and say it must be something dead in the bushes. God, I'm gonna barf. Why didn't we smell this when we came by the last couple times? Lauren said. I shrugged and pulled my shirt collar up over my nose. She did the same. Want to look for it? I said. It might be a deer or something, they swim out to the islands sometimes. Lauren shook her head violently. Fuck that, let's just get out of here, she said. She started jogging away toward camp and I began to follow. Suddenly there was a violent rustling in the palmetto and scrub, not far from the trail. We both froze, staring toward the shaking plants. Whatever it was quick and retreating, and the sound faded into the brush. What the hell was that? Lauren said. Probably something eating whatever we're smelling. A opossum or something, I said. We stood there for a few seconds, still trying to beat back the heebie-jeebies, and then without saying anything else, we resumed our jog back to camp. After a few minutes, we rounded a bend in the trail and entered the clearing. John, who was standing by the campfire with his arms akimbo, whirled as we came up on him. We were both panting from the trot we'd maintained all the way back. "Where the fuck were you guys?" he said. We were taken aback by how agitated he seemed. "What's your problem?" Lauren said. John looked at both of us for a second, probably wondering why we were both sweaty and assuming we had been doing something we hadn't, and then he turned back in the direction he had been facing a moment ago. "I don't know where Lisa went. She said she needed to pee right after you guys left." He was taking half steps in a circle, looking out into the now dark woods. "It's probably been a half hour by now." Didn't you guys hear me hollering? I hadn't even thought about it until just now, writing this, but we hadn't. We hadn't heard anybody shouting anything at the time, and the island is small enough that you could hear somebody really shouting from anywhere. So that's something weird I hadn't even realized for the past 12 years. Anyway, I asked John why he hadn't gone and looked for her, and he just shrugged. By now, I'd gotten over the creeps of the event back on the trail, so I suggested that Lauren stay in camp, and I'd go with John to find Lisa. It was only a little spit of sand, we could Amish search the whole place by midnight, if we had to. Luckily, we didn't have to. We'd barely left camp in the direction that Lisa had left in when we spotted her, her white t-shirt easily visible even in the twilight. She was standing in a thicket of palmetto, which was pretty dumb, considering how much a diamondback rattler might appreciate such a hiding place. She was facing away from us, toward the opposite shore. John called out to her, but she didn't respond. I called out to her, and nothing. We walked toward her, calling at her with rising apprehension, until we were on the edge of the thick shrubs. She was just standing there, back to us, staring into the dark. John and I looked at each other, thoroughly freaked out, and then he waded into the palmetto. He said her name once more, softly, just before slowly reaching his arm toward her. The moment his hand touched her shoulder, she jolted, and spun toward him, breathing hard. John jumped backwards. "John!" She shouted at him, seeming to be genuinely surprised. "What the fuck, you scared the crap out of me." "What?" John said. "We've been calling your name for 30 minutes and you're standing here like a freak, and we scared you." She creased her eyebrows, confused, and shook her head. "One did not. I just came out here to pee." She looked down. It was only barely noticeable in the dark, but there was an obvious wet stain in her khaki short shorts. 1-to-1. She stuttered, clapping her hands over her mouth. She'd pissed herself. We all stood stunned for a few seconds, and then John snapped to sense and walked back to her, taking her into a hug. "Hey," he said, "one don't know what the heck happened, but it's not big deal." "Okay." Lisa was speechless. So was I. It was the weirdest thing I'd even seen. I was thinking to myself about seizures or something. Meanwhile, Lisa starts crying softly into John's shoulder, and he turns to look at me with this "go back to camp while I take care of this" look. So I did just that. I only had a minute or two to explain to Lauren what had happened before they reappeared at the edge of light from the campfire. Lisa was looking at her feet, her face still deeply red, but John, without a word, went into their tent and came back out a moment later with some fresh clothes for her. She went to the other side of the oyster mound, and when she came back, she was wearing some jean shorts and a yellow tank top. I guess she'd thrown everything else she was wearing out into the woods, because she wasn't carrying any of her old clothes. The three of us had taken seats around the campfire, still silent, and similarly silent. She joined us. It took some time, but after we'd all had a few beers, things lightened back up. The mood turned fun, we all got a buzz, and the rest of the night was what we had been hoping for. Jokes, making out. Just a lot of bullshitting. We turned in sometime in the early morning. I got laid, and all was at peace with the world until, of course, the sun came up. I was awoken most unpleasantly by John shouting my name. I jerked upright from the deep, black sleep of the drunk and hungover, gasping for breath the way a drowning man does when pulled above water. John had unzipped our tent and was yelling at me from the circular entry. Lauren was pressed against me in the sleeping bag, nude, and moaning for John to shut the fuck up. I couldn't even get a word out through my dry mouth, so I waved him off while nodding, trying to signal that I was getting up. John backed off, finally quiet, leaving me to extricate myself from the arms of my naked girlfriend and the nice, comfy sleeping bag. I pulled on some shorts and a shirt, and groggily climbed out of the tent in the humid morning air. John was frantically pacing around the blackened remains of our campfire. He whirled toward me as soon as I was out of the tent. "Dude," he said frantically, "Lisa is fucking gone." Nothing was registering with me yet. I yawned and stretched. "What? Lisa is fucking gone?" When I woke up, she wasn't there. "I've been fucking shouting, how the hell did you not wake up?" I shrugged, still not fully invested in the conversation. One don't know what. It was starting to crystallize in my head. Lisa was gone. "Lisa is gone?" I said. "Yes." I said something intelligent like, "What the fuck is her problem?" John had already turned around and started into the brush. "Come on man, we've got to find her." I hesitated for a second, and then turned to poke my head back into the tent. I doubt Lauren even heard me, but I told her I was going to help John find Lisa. She murmured something in her sleep. It took me a minute to catch up with John, who was moving at a pretty frantic pace through the underbrush, calling for Lisa. All the while I didn't bother trying to talk. When I caught up, just followed along, looking around us. The island is pretty wide open, nothing but straight trunk pine trees and low scrub, so you can see a pretty long way. It isn't some twisted, gnarled old growth forest, and it isn't claustrophobic at all. L5333333333333 AAL, John was shouting. It seemed pretty silly, when I think about it. Like I said, the island is so small that a person standing at one end could probably hear a loud cry from the other end without a problem. How did this girl keep getting lost? John was shouting, and I was worried that she'd had another seizure or something and was busy choking on her own tongue in a bush somewhere. This went on for an hour, at least. We reached one shore, followed it to one tip of the island, then cut back into the woods and followed an overgrown trail all the way to the far tip. It was on that far end of the island that we made our unpleasant discovery. At the fringe of the underbrush, right where the bush meets the sand of the beach, we found a big swath of flattened foliage. As if something big had rolled around there to make a bed. But all of the green brush was covered in a fan spray of tacky, reddish-brown blood. There was no doubt about what it was. John and I had both hunted him a lot more than one. But we'd gutted deer and hog. There was no doubt that something big had been completely mutilated here. But there was nothing but the tacky spray of blood. No fur, no bones, no half-eaten carcass. We were completely mute. We were both thinking the same thing, but neither could think of anything to say. I'm sure his brain was running the same routine as mine, rationalize. It was a deer. There's a bobcat or maybe a panther out here. Sure, there's an adult panther on this tiny island who eats a deer and doesn't leave a scrap of bone. Okay. The air smelled awful. It was already hot, much hotter than the weather report had predicted, and the smell was exactly like what you'd expect from a Goatman story. But there was no mystical reason for it. No question. It was the coppery twang of blood. John gulped down a gag from next to me. So we left. There was no reason to stay. We hiked through the woods, past the gore-covered matted clearing back toward the camp. John grew more and more frantic, and I grew more and more annoyed. I'm not going to say I wasn't warned. I was. I really was worried about Lisa, but I barely knew her, and in the past 12 hours she had mysteriously disappeared twice and was pissing up what was supposed to be a fun weekend, and to top it off, was royally freaking me the fuck out. So we get back to camp, and guess what we see? I'm sure you already have. Lisa and Lauren are sitting next to the campfire, which is burning again, cooking up some bacon from the cooler. I sigh and mutter something profane under my breath, but John fucking loses it. He runs into the clearing gibbering like a madman, yelling at Lisa. "Where have you been? We've been shouting for you all fucking morning. The fuck is your problem?" And so on. Lisa and Lauren look utterly stunned. Lisa just stares at him silently, eyes wide. But Lauren takes it for a couple seconds, and then jumps up and starts giving it right back. Updates might be slow for a bit. Putting the kid to bed, and my wife, not Lauren, needs my help. She's been sitting here watching me write this, and actually I'm really appreciating her input. She hasn't been making fun of me or giving me crap about how silly the stuff sounds. Any parts that seem really descriptive, I guess are probably that way because she's been asking questions and making sure I'm staying on point and not rambling anyway. Updates coming as often as I can sit here and wait through the flood filter to click submit. One more real quick. Fuck you asshole, why don't you settle the fuck down? We haven't heard you shouting anything, why don't you just relax? About halfway through her counter assault, she starts glaring at me, like had anything to do with it. So I walk up, put a hand on John's shoulder, and give him the kind of quick calm the fuck down lecture that only a close friend can give. Afterwards, he shuts up, and sits down next to Lisa. Sorry, I was just really worried, he mutters. Lisa just nods. So we sit around the fire for a bit. We eat some bacon, except for Lisa, who takes her share, just stares at it. Some more awkward silence, and then Lauren grabs my shoulder and gives me a let's go somewhere private look. We make our excuses to John and Lisa, and head into the woods on the far side of Oyster Mound. We get a few hundred yards down a trail, when Lauren spins around to face me. What the fuck is up with them? She says. I'm unprepared, and just throw up my hands in a what, me worry? gesture. First she disappears last night, then you guys disappear this morning, and she hasn't said a word since I got her out of the tent. I'm just shaking my head, having no idea what's going on. Hang on. I say, John woke me up because Lisa was missing this morning, and we've just spent the last couple hours tromping around trying to find her. Then we find you guys making breakfast like nothing ever happened. What do you mean she was in the tent? Now it was Lauren's turn to look confused for a second. I got up after you left, and she was in their tent. I woke her up, got the fire going again, and we've been sitting there, awkward as hell because she won't say anything, waiting for you to. We just looked at each other for a long moment. This is fucked up, I said. Another long silence. She nodded, digesting her own thoughts. I want to go home, Lauren said. Part of me wanted to disagree, wanted to man up and chalk it all up to silliness and get our weekend back on track. But all I did was nod. Okay, I said. We headed back to camp. John and Lisa are still sitting right where we left them, still silent. For some reason, I feel like I need to explain to John what Lauren and I have been discussing, so I ask John if he can come down to the boat with me to get some stuff we left there, while giving Lauren and I know what I'm doing look. John agrees and we head off. 10 minutes later and we're standing by the boat, which is resting completely on the damp, low-tide shore, a good 10 feet from the shallow, lapping waves. So John, I say, Lauren and I think we should leave as soon as we can. Huh? John responds, how come? How come? Seriously? How come your girlfriend frigging keeps disappearing? John starts shaking his head. Fuck you, man, that's not cool. Look, I don't know what happened last night. I'm thinking she's a secret epileptic or something, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. We stare at each other for a few seconds. Lauren says she was in your tent after we left. What? John stammers. Are you sure she was, gone? I ask, trying to make some sense of the situation. Are you kidding? I think I can tell if there's a second person in my fucking tent, dude. Okay, I say, raising my hands in a settle down gesture. Lauren just said that after we left, she got up, and Lisa was asleep in your tent. I don't know what the fuck is going on, but I agree with Lauren that we should just call this a weekend and head back. John was shaking his head, trying to figure out what he wanted to say, when I saw his eyes focus on something behind me, and widen. I turned, and immediately saw what had caught his attention. The plastic housing had been yanked off of the outboard motor of the boat. It was laying in the boat, the clips that held it in place snapped off. The motor had been vandalized, really. The spark plug wires were yanked out, ripped and torn apart from the plug heads. Most of the other wiring was ripped to pieces. The prop was completely gone, as well as the pin. It took a few seconds to sink in, just how fucked we suddenly were. What the fuck, we both said at the same time. Before either of us had had a chance to fully internalize what we were seeing, a piercing scream echoed out of the woods behind us, coming from the camp. Without a thought, we set off down the trail at a dead sprint. We found Lauren sitting in the middle of the trail, 100 feet or so from the bend that entered the clearing. She was on her knees, knuckles in her mouth, hyperventilating. She looked at us as we ran up to her, eyes confused and panicked. "Baby," I said as I fell to my own knees next to her, putting my hands on her shoulders. I shook her and called her name. She blinked a few times, her eyes seeming to focus on mine. "What is it, baby?" I said again. She just shook her head and pointed. John and I turned to look. In a pile at the base of a palmetto plant, just on the edge of the trail, were a pair of jean shorts and a yellow tank top. They were stained dark red. "What the fuck?" John said, moving toward them for a closer look. Lauren stammered. "One was coming out to," she leaned in close, whispering. "One had to poop," she said into my ear. "One was coming back to camp and god damn it," she shouted. She started hitting me, softly, in the chest, her hands balled into fists. "What the fuck are you guys doing? What the fuck is going on?" "Dude," John said from behind me. "These are Lisa's." We stared at each other. None of us could think of anything better to do. "One want to go home," Lauren said. I promised her that we were, soon, but we had to go pack up. She looked very unhappy, but nodded. I helped her back to her feet, and we tromped through the pine needles back to camp. I didn't have the heart to tell her about the boat. We get back to camp, and there's Lisa, sitting calm as can be by the almost dead campfire. John runs over to her, almost as if he's surprised to see her still in one piece, and he takes her in his arms and starts whispering into her ear. Lauren and I can see from his face that he's going to pieces, but he seems to be doing his best, in a crazy way, at least, to comfort and get through to Lisa. We're both just glad that she is, in fact, in one piece. We stand awkwardly at the edge of camp for a bit, watching John whisper reassurances to Lisa. Eventually I decide I need to fill Lauren in on the boat situation, so I lead her a bit away and tell her what we'd seen. I was expecting a Lisa-level freak out, but she took it more calmly than John or I probably had. "Must have been an animal," she said, completely matter-of-fact. "Raccoons tear stuff up all the time." There was no questioning in her voice. I nodded. "You're probably right." Only took a few seconds to convince myself. It was probably a frigging raccoon. Keep in mind that I had, in fact, experienced raccoon mayhem many times in my life. They can actually cause some pretty serious damage if they want to get into or out of something, and it wasn't hard to make myself believe it. I debated with myself whether to tell Lauren about the blood-stained clearing, but decided that she was taking things way too well, and there was no reason to fuck that up. So we spent a few minutes discussing strategies for getting home. She asked if John and I could fix the boat. I said probably not. She asked if we could swim to shore. I said probably, if we were really desperate. She checked her phone for signal. She didn't have any. None of us did. We were still brainstorming options, none all the well thought out, when John found us. "Guys," he said, "I'm worried about Lisa." That got our attention. "She won't say anything," he said. He was looking at the ground, brow knitted. 7 don't know what to do. Lauren nodded. She wouldn't talk to me this morning. I'm worried too. Maybe she really did have some kind of seizure or something. Has she ever said anything to you about anything like that? Medical stuff? Lauren sounded almost hopeful. Hopeful for an answer that made sense. Nah, John said, shaking his head. I mean nothing like this. I don't know what to do, he repeated. We spent some time in a little circle, discussing escape plans, but nothing great came to mind. To reiterate, the island wasn't terribly far from shore, and John and I were strong swimmers, so if we got really desperate, we could make it for help. Still, the water was shallow in places, full of sharp as hell oyster bars, and potentially swarming with bull sharks, so that was a resort that we weren't freaked out enough to use just yet. Anyway, we end up going back to camp. It's probably about 11 o'clock, maybe closer to noon. It's hot as hell, there's tons of biting flies and no sea and there's no spirit of fun. Nobody wants to go swimming to cool off, nobody wants to tell jokes. It's just the three of us trying to make stiff conversation, while little Miss Sunshine is sitting there, still dead silent. Occasionally Lisa would look up at one of us, suddenly, and stare. Mostly she'd just keep her eyes locked on the dead fire. At one point John left to go work on the boat. I was going to go too, but Lauren made it clear that she didn't want to be alone. There was no reason to point out that she wasn't alone, she was with Lisa. But that didn't need to be said. John was gone for an hour or two, and he came back looking dejected. I knew that was coming. The motor was trashed. So the afternoon passes by, with the three of us basically stunned into inaction. I mean, looking back, I'm thinking the same thing. Anybody reading this is, why weren't you guys building a rat, or making a shelter, or tying up Lisa? I know. But we were young, and, again, nothing outright crazy was going on. We were caught somewhere in the doldrums between calm and panic. Twilight starts to come on, and we've spent the entire day doing basically nothing. At one point Lauren and I went and gathered more firewood, so we were set for the night. Around 6 o'clock, John led Lisa by the hands into the tent, and laid her down. I remember looking at her through the round door, just before John zipped it up. She was laying on her back, like a corpse, eyes wide open staring at the roof of the tent. With Lisa in the tent, we started conversing somewhat normally again. We got the fire going again as twilight was coming on, popped a few more beers, and, for a little while, we forgot about the obvious problems and started having some fun. I mean, again, the boat was weird, but it probably was just a raccoon. We were easily within reach of land if it came to that, and it probably wouldn't because there was usually a lot of boat traffic around the bay, checking crab traps, or fishing, or even coming to the island to hang out. The blood, I convinced myself, was just from some predation event. And Lisa, although acting weird as fuck, was probably asleep in the tent and not actively bringing us down. The good mood lasted until well past full dark. I don't know what time exactly, but it had been dark a while. John got up to piss, but he'd only gone a few paces before he stopped. Guys. I remember he muttered. Lauren and I turned, both mid-laugh. The smiles drained from our faces like something you'd see in a movie. The door to John's tent was unzipped, wide open, and the tent was empty. "You've got to be fucking kidding me," Lauren hissed. We were both up instantly. John was in his tent, rifling for a flashlight. A moment later, I was in my backpack, grabbing the battery lanterns I'd brought. I handed one to Lauren, who took it with hesitation. She obviously knew what it meant, and didn't like it. "We've got to find her," I said. Lauren just stared at me, wide-eyed, and shook her head. "We've got to find her," I said. Lauren just stared at me, wide-eyed, and shook her head. How the hell did she unzip the tent and leave without any of us noticing? Or hearing her? John said, His voice was tinged with panic, kind of high-pitched. He was shining his mag light beam in random directions, the white light cutting through the dark pine woods. "Let's split up," he said. "Fuck that," was my instant reply. Don't know if you've never seen a horror movie, but there is no way I'm leaving Lauren alone, and there's no way I am going out there, alone, right now. My speech might not have been that sensible, but it was something very similar. Lauren obviously agreed, so John formed up with us, and as a small triangle of bodies and flashlights, we set out down the weedy trail that started nearest to the tent. To reuse the phrase, we went about this Amish search for a while. Arms pretty much linked, eyes and lights facing in every direction. We'd grown up on Scooby-Doo, we weren't letting anybody fall through a trapdoor, or a reversible bookshelf. When we'd first left camp, we'd been shouting Lisa's name, but after about 10 minutes, we gave up. She absolutely would have heard us, but she absolutely wasn't answering. So we searched in silence, girding ourselves against the seemingly inevitable horror movie moment where the cat leaps out of the closet while the guy with the hatchet is under the bed. Anyway, we work our way around pretty much the entire island. If it was, hypothetically, midnight when we started looking, it was probably 3 or 4 in the morning now. I could tell from the sky that dawn was a while off. Suddenly we realize we've come around to the boat. Lauren breaks from the group a bit, and goes over to the boat. John and I, who are still peering into the woods, hear her gasp. We both whirl around. I mean, our nerves are raw, and Lauren's gasp is probably the first human sound we've heard in 2 hours. She raises an arm to shield her eyes from the flashlight beams we've leveled on her, then gestures toward the boat. No way. I remember John groaning. The fiberglass had been scratched to hell. Deep gouges and shallow lines were etched into every surface of the boat. The cushions of the seats were shredded, fiber padding strewn from, literally, bow to stern. We ran the lights over the exterior of the hull, looking at the frantic, deep gouges in the material. It seemed, in hindsight, that there were almost patterns there, but there weren't. I wish I could say something really too spooky, like they were cave drawings of mastodons, or 666, or skulls and crossbones or something. But it wasn't. It was like a 3-year-old scribbling in a coloring book. And then we noticed the broken oyster shells spread around the boat. It was somewhere between low and high tide, so water was lapping at the stern of the boat, but the bow was high and dry. And in the damp sand were dozens of broken shells, many with curls of plastic and fiberglass still stuck to the sharp tips. I remember Lauren stifled a moan, and then started crying. I put an arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. Want to go home," she cried. I remember her face, turning red. Her eyes, pink, tears pooling and running down her cheeks. John wasn't doing any better. He had returned his flashlight beam to the woods, and he was whipping it around without any purpose. Panic was obviously setting in. It was nipping at me, but I guess I was just in a slightly better place than my friends. I started to say, "Guys, let's just take a few deep breaths and rel." And then John screamed, and then Lauren screamed. John's flashlight beam had stopped, and was illuminating Lisa. She was on the edge of the trees, her face pale and her hair a messy tangle of pine straw and twigs. As in response to John and Lauren's ejaculations, Lisa began screaming as well. I don't know how the fuck I managed to hold it together, but I recall thinking something kind of silly. I thought, at least Lisa is talking again. So I started shaking Lauren by her shoulders. She dropped her lantern to the ground. John had gotten himself under control, as had Lisa apparently, because silence descended over the beach. The only sound, as usual, was the lapping of wavelets against the shore. At this point, I'd like to make another hindsight observation. I can't believe I didn't think about it then, but I also realize my mind wasn't exactly functioning in a logical way right then. Maybe John or Lauren noticed it, but they never mentioned it to me. Lisa was, at this point, wearing the same khaki shorts and white t-shirt she had been wearing when we'd first arrived. The shorts she'd pissed in. The outfit she'd changed out of that very first night. And only now, looking back, do I realize that she'd been wearing that when John and I had first come back from the boat. The bloody clothes we'd found on the trail? Those were the clothes she'd changed into that first night in the woods. Sorry if this seems a bit contrived, but some of this is only just now seeming obvious to me, too. So, back to the story. Now, Lisa starts gasping and crying, and then she starts sobbing John's name. John runs over to her, and wraps his arms around her. She does the same. They're wrapped in each other's embrace. And Lisa starts panting, "What's happening, what's happening, what's happening," over and over. Lauren and I turn to face each other, both speechless, when from the woods nearby rips this utterly terrifying howl again. John and I are both pretty woodsy, John more than one, but we're both campers, we're both hikers. He hunts with his family a lot. We were both stricken by this sound. The smell from before. Could describe, but this sound I really can't. If you've ever heard raccoons mating, they make this wild, high-pitched ululating sort of screech. That's the bass. Put on top of that a helping of fake Bigfoot groans from those awful Animal Planet specials and a maybe some T-Rex from Jurassic Park, and you can kinda imagine what I'm talking about. The four of us freeze. John and I, the only two still holding flashlights, spin to face the sound, but there's nothing there. I hear Lauren mutter, "Oh God," from beside me. I reach out an arm sideways, the way a dad does to hold his kid back when he slams on the brakes in the car. The howl comes again, this time seemingly closer. John, who's still holding Lisa by the shoulder, starts to back up toward Lauren and one, who are nearer the boat. I hear John muttering "fuck, fuck, fuck, fuck" under his breath. Finally, the howl bursts out once more, this time way too close, and there's a frantic commotion from the underbrush. Something is definitely come toward us now, and fast. John twirls Lisa around by her shoulder and starts to run, trying to close the 50-odd feet between us. As he does so, I do the same to Lauren, spinning her and running for the boat. Now, I have no idea why we all instinctively ran for the boat. It was a third beach still, and the motor was dead as dirt. But, hey, we weren't really thinking at that moment. So I'm basically throwing Lauren into the boat, when I hear the muffled scuff of something hitting beach sand, and a curse from behind me. I turn to see that John and Lisa have fallen onto the beach, and John's flashlight has tumbled away from him. At the same time, Lauren slips on the wet fiberglass of the boat, and falls down into the bow, taking my flashlight with her. This is the point that I still find hard to believe or remember, but I'm going to type out the first things that come to mind, and trust it to be as accurate as possible. I'm looking at the vague, dark forms of John and Lisa laying the sand, maybe 20 feet away from the boat. The moon is pretty dark, maybe a quarter moon. From the brush and scrub emerges the shape. It's human, but it's not right. It'd be hard to describe, except, well, Lauren and I saw a movie a year later that really helped. I remember when he appeared on screen for the first time, the character. I felt cold, and then a bit nauseous. Lauren simply stood up and left the theater. I followed her shortly after. It was actually one of the last times Lauren and I saw each other. It was Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. And of course, the character was Gollum. The shape was, like I said, humanoid, very pale. It almost shimmered in the faint moonlight. It padded across the sand four-legged, like an animal, but awkwardly. Its body was obviously not designed for quadruped locomotion. I watched with wide eyes as it beelined for John's fallen flashlight. It leapt upon it like a cat on a bird, and began thrashing it against the sand, grasping it and beating it into the shore again and again. This all happened in the blink of an eye, really. John, staring at this occurring only a few feet from where he lay, managed to pull himself together and dragged Lisa back up, half running and half crawling toward the boat. I helped him toss Lisa in, and together we began shoving at the bow of the boat, trying to get it back into the deeper water. I didn't look back at whatever was happening on the shore just behind me. The thing was squealing now, like a pig in shit, as the saying goes. I could still hear the thumping of the light hitting the dense, wet sand. And there was the light itself, of course. The beam of light was slicing up and down toward us, illuminating the boat, then up into the sky, then back down. And then nothing, it went dark. Immediately the thumping stopped. John and I had succeeded in getting the entire boat back into the water, but it was still very shallow. Our feet were wet, but the water wasn't even up to our ankles. The girls were now screaming from where they were laying in the bow of the boat. And then the thing screamed from behind us. If it was terrifying before, from the woods, it was far worse when the thing was screeching down the backs of our shirts. I turned to look, and what I saw, well, I don't have any trouble remembering. That part of the story, I don't need any help to describe. It was like a silverback gorilla. Not so thick and muscular, but the same pose. It rested on its legs, hunched low. Two stringy, muscular arms beat the sand around it in a rage. I couldn't see the face that clearly, after all, it was dark. But I was struck by a sense of humanity. There were two eyes, there was a nose, there was a mouth. Perhaps a bit distorted, but not so noticeably as the body. At least not in the shadows of the sliver of a moon. Anyway, it howled again and seemed poised to charge at us. What I did next was purely reflex. I reached down into the bow, and yanked from beneath the prone body of my terrified girlfriend the lantern she had pulled from my hands. At the time, I meant to throw it at the thing, but I missed bad. The lantern whirled past its shoulder, and landed with a puff of sand at the edge of the beach, just short of the palmettos. The thing seemed surprised, it sniffed the air. Then it turned, and in an instant, it was after the light. John and I couldn't move for a few moments, but the urgency of the moment took over again. We were shoving at the boat, using every ounce of ability. Finally there was a squeak, and the boat was free of the sand. We pushed more, forcing it into hip-deep water. Then we both climbed in, and turned, and watched. We could still see the frantic movement of the lantern, just a beam of light, being pounded against the sand. Occasionally we would hear a squeal or a groan from the thing on the beach. Finally, after 30 or 40 seconds, the light flickered and went black. Then there was silence. The only sound was the lapping of the water against the side of the boat. The current, luckily, was taking us away from the island. We drifted for a few hours before the sun started to come up. By then, we were close enough to the mainland to entertain the idea of swimming in. Lisa, though, was still pretty much out of it. She was talking, and crying, but nobody thought it was a good idea to put her in the water. So we waited. Eventually we drifted near another boat, a charter fishing guide out with a client. We babbled some story to him. I'm sure he assumed we were just some dumb, drunk kids who got lost and almost died of heat stroke. Either way, he towed us in. And that's about the entire story. Like I said, we told plenty of people. It wasn't some great secret among us, but nobody believed it. Lisa and John broke up almost instantly. They didn't even really break up, John just never saw or spoke to her again. Lauren and I lasted a bit longer, we just stopped talking about the event one day, until that night at the movies. I drove her home. We talked a few times on Trillion, but we never saw each other again. And then 11 years go by, and some stupid stories on the internet stir all this shit back up, and I get a bug up my butt to write it down. Sorry to add another creepypasta to the pile. Even sitting here, rereading this, I keep telling myself it must have just been some cracked out homeless island bum, or even one of our older siblings playing the king of pranks. But I just don't know. And I guess I never will. So that's about it. Sorry if the ending is a bit anticlimactic. Like I said in the beginning, nothing really life-changing happened. None of us ever spoke to Lisa again, as far as I know. After Lauren and I split up, we, similarly, never had contact. She transferred to a school in California in her junior year. John is the sadder story. He pretty much dropped out right after this all happened. He never went back to school in the fall. We hung out every now and then, but slowly he just stopped returning phone calls or emails. Eventually he completely fell off the radar. The last thing I heard of him was from his mom, probably 2 years after this all happened. He had moved out, and didn't leave any contact information. Since then, in the modern age of the internet, I look for him now and then on Facebook, or LinkedIn, things like that, but I've never seen any sign of him. I definitely worry about my friend. Now someone screen cap this shit for the future generations. How do I encounter a skinwalker? Just make up a story like everyone else here. Go to the middle of the desert. Eat peyote. Sit down, drink water and wait. Firstly, you need these items. Tent. A cutthroat razor. A large sack, burlap or cloth. A length of rope, over 15 m. White chalk soaked in animal blood for 14 days, allow chalk time to dry, normally 12 days. A small animal such as a cat or dog. Red string, a lot of red string. Measuring tape. Next you need to find a location similar to this. Large forested area a good few miles from civilization. Now ensure you have everything ready to go, best to prep the site in advance. Prep. Locate a section of forest that is at least 15 minutes walk from any possible exit. This spot must also be at least 20 minutes walk from the nearest path. Once you find this spot, take your red string and mark a tree roughly in the middle. Using the measuring tape, take the string and measure out a line that is roughly 20 feet and tie the string off to the next tree. Work in a rough circle, tying the string around each tree you pass until you reach the first tree you tied it to. Memorize this location. Use the red chalk to mark the trees with letters. Closet's tree to the circle must be marked with Q, then work your way back round until you reach Q again. With the area prepped, wait 3 to 4 days, get everything you need and head out to your location. Now you must look out for these signs. Take note of the letters on the trees. If they have been disturbed, then you must rewrite them as you pass. Walk the red string circle once. If it is intact all the way around, then you may as well head home. If the letters have been disturbed and the string is broken, fix the letters and fix the string. Set up your tent as close to the center tree you can. Set up the candles around the center tree, no less than 4, no more than 9, and light them. When the sun begins to set, use the cutthroat razor to trim away fur from the cat or dog. Nape of the neck is best. Yes, this part must be done on site. Bum the fur on each candle in order of closets to your tent around. Release the animal and head inside your tent. Set the sack outside the tent with the rope and close the tent. It's your choice if you sleep or stay awake, but you need to make as little noise as possible and have no lights in the tent. If you stay awake, prepare yourself for the most scary thing you've ever seen. Remember, do not attempt to interact with the skinwalker. Turn on any light source. Make a loud noise. Leave the tent before dawn. Unzip the tent through the night. Now if you have done all this, then remain as quiet as you can. Once everything becomes dark outside, you'll firstly hear noises such as scraping. It will be faint and distant and may be hard to hear. The noise will grow closer. This can take anywhere between 1 to 2 hours before it ends, but do not leave the tenty. Next you may hear a muffled shuffling just outside the tent, like something being stuffed into a bag, followed by some strange animal noises. These can range from dying animal sounds, odd sounding growls, whispers, distorted speech, distant cries for help, several different types of laughing. These sounds will last for up to an hour but do not react at all. After this you should see what looks like a distorted person or possibly crawling animal very close to your tent. If it begins showing interest in your tent such as scratching, poking or sniffing at it, then close your eyes and keep your head down. This may take between 30 minutes up to the sometimes longer. But once this is done you'll hear the creature run away into the distance. This is an important part. Do not leave the fucking tent. Close your eyes and count. Once you begin reaching around 25 to 2700 it should be safe. You may now sleep peacefully or wait till sunrise without incident as long as you stay inside the tent. Once the sun rises you can safely leave the tent. Keep your eyes low and do not look up into the trees. You will now see the sack tied and soaked in blood. Inside will be whatever animal you took with you inside. If the sack is empty then leave as soon as you can. Do not dawdle and do not run but leave quickly. If the sack is full do not open it. Now examine the candles around the center tree and look for the least melted one. From this point head out to the outer ring of string. If it is broken at this point then leave as quickly as you can. Follow the string around until you find the break. Now head back to the candle tree and take note of how melted the candle is. If it is almost gone or less than halfway you should be fine. If it is more than half then leave. If the string was broken in a different place and the sack is full and the candle is melted more than half you are safe. Pack up, leave the sack and head back to the letter marked trees. Take note of which letters remain but do not fix any of the removed letters and just head home. If the letters remaining were at least 3 apart I.E. A was fine. B and C was disturbed. D was fine. Then you met a docile skinwalker, rare but these are the curious type that follow campers. There was a gap of 5 or more then you met a peaceful skinwalker. This kind are the ones that stay out of sight and make noises. If the disturbance of letters was erratic then it was a typical skinwalker, not violent but not docile. If every letter was disturbed then you met the violent kind. These are the skinwalkers that will integrate into groups of hikers, of campers for the sole purpose of killing or feeding. You got lucky, you survived. If you didn't follow any of the safety instructions or attempted to leave the tent, make a noise etc., then you're most likely dead. So yeah, if you had any instance where I told you to leave quickly then leave. If you don't you're dead. Fucking with skinwalkers is dangerous and they will only come if there is 2 or less people only, so groups won't be able to use this method. Good luck, Anon. Would you mind telling us how the fuck you know this? Found the guide on an old net text site from back in the early web days. Me and a friend decided to try it out. Put it this way, he tried opening the tent, I cowered like a pussy. I'm still here. He went missing almost 20 years ago now. I don't know, I am a Plains tribe, Southern Arapaho to be exact. Different tribes have their own customs and beliefs. My best guess is something that it could use to survive, like a blanket, serape, Mexican blanket, a cast iron pot, something you would take camping with you. Like I said, I don't really know much, just what I have heard from other natives. What happens if I shoot at the spook whopper? How much do you know about these things? What are they? The one we saw was easily 6 to 7 feet tall, being 12 at the time. It was terrifying. As for shooting it, feel free to try, but they are very fast, so I'd guess you'd get 1 or 2 shots before it fucks you up. These things are excellent climbers and tend to hide up in the trees. Do you know what they are or where they're from? No idea, I'm afraid.
I have a short one that is relevant to a lot of the stories which are going around. This is copy-pasted from the other thread, but I'm finishing it here. B. Butterbar Platoon Leader for CAV Platoon. B. At National Training Center at Fort Benning. B. Innawoods for Fire Training Exercise, FTX. The FTX is about 4 days long and involves a lot of land NAV shit, patrol bases, etc. So far has been pretty boring. At about 1800 on 3rd day, get a call from the company commander over the radio. He's pulling the platoon leaders in to talk to us. Show up at company TOC, basically Co's truck, a Kemp stove, and pallets of MREs. Wait forever for company commander to show up. Finally shows up at 8:45 and tells me and the rest of the platoon leaders that there's been reports of a really big, aggressive bear that's been following groups around at the NTC. If it shows up, fire shots to scare it off, don't bury your trash, etc. I don't think much of it at the time, just think we got all our time wasted for no reason. Sends us off to head back to our PLTS on our own. Cloudy, so it's pretty much pitch dark out, kind of creepy, naving back by myself, but I'm in full warrior mode, so I do it without thinking. Up for patrolling, so I leave my flashlight off. Following trail back to rendezvous point with my platoon where they were supposed to have set up a patrol base. See headlights off in the distance on the trail, get off the trail and hide. Watch the Humvee pass by, looks just like range control or something. See its lights fall on something huge across the road for an instant before the Humvee rolls on. Tactically shit pants for a second, sit in utter silence for a few minutes thinking it might be a bear. Nothing, no movement. After a while I realize I'm probably just being a tard and get back on the trail to keep going. Nothing more out of the ordinary happens, get to around the point where the PB should be and notice a chain of chem lights heading off into the woods as well as a parked Humvee. Head into woods, following chem light chain. Get to the end of the chem light chain. Someone calls out the challenge. When you set up a patrol base, if you see someone you call out a challenge phrase and they answer back with the password, it means they're friendly. I don't remember what the password was, so I just say, "It's fucking Lieutenant Anon." Guy just goes whatever and lets me by. I get to the center of the patrol base and link up with my platoon sergeant. About an hour goes by, I feel weirdly tense, can't sleep. Suddenly shouting from one side of the patrol base, immediately followed by hail of blank fire as whole squad lights up an area. Grab my rifle and run over shouting for a status from the squad leader. No response yet. No one moving or talking. Run up to one of the sentries and ask what the hell happened. He said he saw someone moving about 10 meters away from their position and called out the challenge. He said they heard someone say, "It's fucking Lieutenant Anon," so they were going to let him through. Guy says the thing suddenly got close and he had this feeling something was wrong. Sees that this person walking into the base has long hair and just starts shooting. Whole squad started shooting. If you've ever shot blanks at night, you know it blinds you for a few seconds during and afterward. When the guy can see again, the guy he saw was gone. WTF for a bit, but say okay and head back to the center of the patrol base. Much later. Talk to the platoon sergeant and RTO, make sure they're okay, and go to sleep for a bit. Woken up by another hail of blank fire. Figure this time we're getting probed by a P4, grab rifle, and run to the side of the PB where the fire came from. I get there, almost no one moving or talking, ask WTF is going on. Team leader says he saw someone a little bit down the hill they were watching, so he issued challenge. Guy calls back, "It's fucking Lieutenant Anon," while he's walking toward the PB. Team leader asks what the hell I'm doing out there. Voice calls back, "It's fucking Lieutenant Anon." Team leader WTFS. Team leader says something way taller than a normal man comes out of the brush. He tactically shits his pants and just starts lighting it up. Again, guy is gone when he can see clearly again where it was. Think this is kinda fucked up for a P4 to be playing head games with us like this. I go back to the center of the PB and try to get to sleep again. Sorry this part took so long, the other 4 were from the old thread. This time I sleep for maybe 15 minutes before I'm woken up by for real up 4, big gun battle going on. Jump to my feet, actually happy shit's hitting the fan for real. Conductor react to contact, drive up 4 off, lane walker starts popping RD sims. SLS/PSG/RTO start executing according to our plan we set up to move PBS. We move about a click and set up the ORP, then move into the new PB. Walking around checking positions and making sure SLS are accounting for people. Good accountability with 3 SLS, go to talk to the last one. Last SL comes up to me just shitting bricks. I ask if he's missing anyone or any gear. He says he counted twice and each time counted an extra person. When he went back to ask if the guy was in the wrong squad, he wasn't there anymore. What? Pull SLS in, ask them if they were missing anyone or had anyone extra. Nothing wrong with anyone else. Figure it's just a screw up with accountability. After an hour it's okay to return to normal sleep rotations. Make plans with platoon sergeant/SLS. I go to sleep. Woken up about an hour later by SL who's SUG for the time period. He tells me I need to come talk to some guy who's freaking out. Go over to where the platoon sergeant is, he's with some Joe who's freaking out. Ask him what the hell happened. Said he was on the line with team leader who I'd talked to before. Got up to go out a bit to take a piss. Mid-piss he looks over to his left down a short hill. Sees someone walking down there. Mumbles to himself, "Oh shit. Person down there fucking cackles," his words, and he nearly pisses all over himself grabbing his rifle. He says it looked like it was made of sticks, his words, and ran like a speed skater, his words again, toward him. Cackled something like, "Lieutenant Anon," while it ran up the hill. FW. Guy runs for his life back to the PB and will not go back out on the line. He demands we bring the whole platoon back to the TOC. We eventually talk him down, things quiet down. Last incident of the night thankfully. I talked to the lane walker about it while no one else was around and he just said he believed the dude and that a lot of weird shit lives in the Georgia swamps. I guess it's kind of a crappy ending, but to this day I am not sure what the fuck might have happened. These stories reminded me of it. At the time I thought it was just hallucinations plus up for, but now I'm not so sure.
Everybody's got ghost stories from past dives. Mostly guys new to the North Seas near zero visibility, it's like fog, makes your mind fill in the blanks. Add to that the hallucinations that sometimes come with HPNS and basically everyone's seen something on a dive but most, rightly, dismiss it. I've seen those kinds of things in perfect vis, crystal clear for 200 feet in front of me. I was real deep but I don't get HPNS and I've never started seeing things. Some of them I touched, so either it's a hallucination of two senses or what I saw were real physical things. I mainly post on DIY but thinking back to past dives keeps me up at night and this is the board they said was the right place to talk about this kind of thing. Keep it coming up, we love OC here. The helmets have cameras, although on about a quarter of the dives they're disabled. Usually not for any clear reason, but sometimes there's oddball stuff that doesn't belong there. Like, really huge seafloor installations that don't look like they're rig related, but something military. So it makes sense they'd cut our cameras. But other times we'll come up and after reviewing the footage, it's backed up, locked away and our copy is deleted. Since we see a huge variety of comically weird sea life, and later on when I try to identify it online it turns out to be a known species, the reasons for that aren't clear either. It's hard to tell the difference between what's bizarre but known, and what might get our footage locked up. An example is, a lot of the old-timers would say that back before Deepsteria enigmatica was a known species they assumed it was a hallucination, or at least the kind of thing you don't admit to seeing. That blew up on YouTube recently, people thought it was a monster. I can understand that. A lot of the stuff you rub elbows with down there fit that description. Some of the really big stuff is now known to be submersible rig equipment. A lot of modern rigs mount most of the hardware on the bottom, to insulate it from storms. The stuff that was obviously for humans is still officially non-existent and it's one of those things that's better for your health if you don't ask about it too much. Some of the sea life we'd commonly talk about is also not yet known to science. We're not out there to do research, so when we run into something like that, it's basically ignored. They're only looking for work-related shit in the helmet cam footage, not studying marine biology. Which is a shame. I see some of the things that meager, underfunded baby submersible expeditions uncover and publish big glossy photos of and it's like that's it? We scrape those off of the bell every day. You can try to tell those types about the really big, anomalous stuff but they laugh it off as tall tales. And if they haven't seen it themselves I don't blame them. How old were these old times? Did you look at Wiki before using this example? No. Early 1970s I'd guess. Hard to believe, but man hasn't been routinely diving that deep for more than half a century or thereabouts. I suppose that's plausible, but it's unlikely that you dove with such men. One of the things I learned from a buddy is that since light doesn't reach the depths we work at, all the food has to come from shit that drifts down from the surface. So there's not much food to go around and that limits how big/energetic the animals can be. There's some exceptions, like giant/colossal squid and whales, but the squid are basically the only mega-scale predator down here, and whales dive from shallower waters. But there's also this thing called deep-sea gigantism, where animals will grow to much larger sizes than their related species further up. Seems contradictory. And it doesn't apply to jellyfish or crustaceans apparently. Everything I've seen that was man-sized or bigger was either something like a jellyfish, made of the same transparent rubbery shit, or something like an overgrown crab, shrimp, or lobster. A lot of those kinds of things ride up with us, clinging to the outside of the bell. The lights attract them. You ever heard of anyone electrolysing their own oxyhydrogen to breathe? The gas should be roughly 33% oxygen, but would the hydrogen be quickly or slowly poisonous? I think I remember some guy on Yahoo Answers saying it would hydrogenate all the fats in your body. Seems like it might be a handy trick for if you run out of air but somehow have electricity and plates for electrodes. Good for a movie, at least. Like having the worst bad trip ever in the worst place imaginable? Exactly. It's a fucking nightmare. You ever heard of anyone electrolysing their own oxyhydrogen to breathe? For the really deep dives we used a breathing gas called hydrox. There's a variant with helium in it called hydrolyox, but I don't know much about it. What I do know is, the Navy is hot for hydrox, because you can manufacture it aboard a submarine. By reclaiming hydrogen from the process they use to extract oxygen from seawater, they can make their own hydrox and never run out. Last I heard they were experimenting with pig digestive bacteria that, when seated in human stomachs, accelerates decompression by chemically neutralizing the nitrogen. Only works with hydrox, naturally, or I doubt they'd bother. Divers in the North Sea report the same thing, after a few pints. It's the porpoise. Can't see shit, imagination runs wild. But with the stuff that's actually out there, what they imagine might be tamer. Welp, a fake a lot of shit is built underwater. Just take all the wiring between North America and Asia. Also, have you ever seen something that scared you shitless? Have you ever been attacked? Because of fake squids often attack things that glow. What company did you work for? What was the biggest creature apart from a whale you've seen? Have you ever seen something you couldn't explain? Have you heard anything like the bloop? Also, have you ever seen something that scared you shitless? Yes, first time I saw a siphonophore, and again when I saw something obviously related to jellies but on a huge scale. It was hollow and billowy but unusually opaque, so you couldn't tell unless you touched it. Just a huge fucking wall of pale undulating flesh suddenly closing in, passing by, and then receding into the distance. There was also what I think may have been some type of saltwater gator with flippers, but when I described it to a buddy he assured me it was a Greenland shark. That wasn't a fucking shark. I'd need to get a better look to say what it was, but it wasn't a shark. What was the most paranormal or fucked up thing you've experienced? Something you still can't explain yourself. Well, when I say I don't hallucinate, I mean I don't see stuff I could mistake for reality. And I've got an above average tolerance, I think. But there are occasionally dives past the 1,000-foot mark, and on one occasion 2,000 feet, which is right up on the limits of what humans can survive, where the brain just kind of goes nuts. My understanding is that the pressure reduces the firing threshold for neurons, so they just kind of fire randomly. Random colors, sounds, memories, tastes and smells, etc. I've never been deeper than 1,800 feet, but that's deep enough to feel the beginnings of it. Look into the changing symptoms of nitrogen narcosis by depth sometime. Starts out really pleasant, but after about 100 feet it turns into something you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. Mixed gases are supposed to prevent that, but different people have different tolerances. Hey op, awesome thread so far. You worked with global diving and salvage. You worked with global diving and salvage. No, I'd like to. There's also an outfit that was hired some time ago to survey and document all the near-shore objects that show up as man-made on sonar down in, I think, Florida. For a guy like me, that's a dream job. Deep sat diving, on rigs, or other equipment is something that grows on you in a big way, but I can't really say I love it. It's just addicting. If I were out to fool you, yeah, I probably would have eased you into that. Suffice to say, there's loads of man-made shit in the ocean that isn't advertised. Nuclear subs don't just have a docking collar for rescue. Any idea what the bloop is? Hey guys, look. It's some OC. Let's tear holes in it instead of enjoying it. No. I've seen a couple good candidates in that size range, but they were all jelly-like colony creatures. I can't comprehend how they'd make any noise, let alone one that loud. Must be something similar to a whale. Did you mean 180 feet instead of 1,800 up? 1,800 would have got you pretty much killed. Ever got tunnel vision? Nope, 1,800. The absolute known limit is 2,300 feet. I realize the pressure seems like an issue, but if you slowly acclimate and breath mixed gas, which also increases in pressure with depth, there's nothing compressible in your body that's still at sea level pressure. You're fully saturated, through and through, adapted to the water pressure like a fish. The 2,300 foot limit is for neurological reasons. There are some barriers we just can't pass yet. All this cool stuff goes unknown because no government wants to fund an underwater equivalent of NASA. That's retarded. Think of what we could discover. There was going to be a wet NASA back in the 60s. For a while after the Navy's Sea Lab program, there was serious planning for a large 30 to 50 man deep sea research station called Ocean Lab, 1,000 feet down. They would have used a compact naval reactor to make hydrox-breathing gas from seawater, so they could keep the base equalized with the water for ease of entry/exit. We decided on the shuttle program and Vietnam War instead, I guess. Officially, the Sea Lab program was cancelled after 3. I don't for a minute think they just up and abandoned the project. Just stopped telling the public about it? If what I saw was some modern iteration of that, they're almost certainly using the Ocean Lab scheme of nuclear-powered hydrox generation. I'd sure like to know what they know about some of these critters. Do you ever get scared of getting sucked or seeing vicious creatures? Last time I got sucked by a vicious creature, I wound up marrying it. Are there evil-looking and nasty creatures you've seen down there? Nothing really evil, as it's hard to think that way about lethargic animals. Even the predators are lethargic and hunt opportunistically, in short bursts of activity. Not much energy to be had down here. But yet for some reason the deep ocean produces almost exclusively nightmare animals. Everything in the shallows is colorful and cute, everything down here is pants shitting. Link to wikipedia.org on high pressure nervous syndrome. Did not know that. Thanks up. Learn something new every day. Oh, the alien bases in the ocean, guys. That'll be the HPNS. I've seen some strange artificial junk, but never any little green men in submarines. Have you seen deep sea creatures that scared the shit out of you? Couple times. If it's a known animal, it's not nearly so bad as when it's something new. Psychologically, we're just not made to handle those kinds of encounters. The siphonophore was one, for me anyway, since I didn't know what one was until it came down right on us. They kinda unfold from something small into this mass of tangled tentacles. Seems impossible it could all come out of that small body. Really did my head in, took a sick leave after that dive. What keeps you from freaking out? Look at the ground. Helps to have a fixed point of reference. The endless black expanse around you doesn't help. Opinions on mermaids and civilizations down below. It's my /x/right to ask this question. LOL. There's an alarming number of people living and working down there, shit you'll never see on modern marvels. But they don't have fishtails. More or less the same thing China's building now, but they're bragging openly about theirs. Hey op, not sure if you're still here but I have a question. When I was about 6 years old I almost drowned 3 times. I remember being under the water not being able to move and just passing the fuck out. Ever since, I've been terrified of water. Not just thalassophobia, fear of the ocean, but full-on hydrophobia. I don't even like swimming in pools, it doesn't terrify me but I'm still very uncomfortable. I am a good swimmer but I'm just scared of the unknown. I hate not seeing what's behind me and I feel out of place in the water, like I'm not supposed to be there and a shark or whatever could just fuck my shit up and I couldn't defend myself at all. Did you ever have these fears? How do I get over it, as I love boats and diving? Did you ever have these fears? How do I get over it, as I love boats and diving? Nope. So long as I'm at the same pressure. I don't trust 2 things, nude suits and rebreathers. Needs to be at ambient pressure and needs to have bubbles coming out of it. I don't care how thick the hull is, water pressure doesn't fuck around. You don't fight it, you adapt your body to it like a polite visitor. Do you dive using a nitrox mix? What are your times spent submersed and what are your decompression times like? I presume you have a pretty nice rebreather. No, nitrox doesn't meaningfully increase safe depth. You might be thinking of Heliox or Trimix but those also are only safe down to a certain depth, after which hydrogen-based breathing gas is the only game in town. How old are you and how can I contact you? I like you, OP. Uh-oh, FBI, everybody run. I just quickly read through this thread, so forgive if I repeat a question. What sorts of scary things have other people claimed to have seen and experienced? And are there any urban legends along those same lines? Wait, aqua legends. There's a sizable contingent of conspiracy types in this field, most of whom buy into the USO stories, unidentified submerged objects. How long are you decompression times? You must spend half a day with the depths you have been describing. Half a day. Try several days. I got a good laugh from this though, thanks. That's what the Navy is going for with biochemical fast decompression though, I'm keeping an eye on that. I don't mind being cooped up in the deck chamber, it's got all the basics you need to be comfy and I'm whatever the opposite of claustrophobic is. Will someone like you ever be able to walk around on the Challenger deep? Well, my first instinct is to say no. Calcium liquefies under that pressure. And 2,300 feet is where the brain stops functioning coherently. But I have been reading transhumanist sci-fi recently that makes me think someday it could be possible. But the person who did it wouldn't be human even a little bit. More interested in species OP, you say you've seen a lot of species that haven't been officially classified yet, can you describe some of those species to us? Also, any stories of fellow divers that actually went mad from the dives? I presume your decompress ions are done in a chamber so? If this is the case, does initial ascent make you very ill? Nope, I don't get seasick, motion sick, HPNS, anything like that. I've got a seaman's constitution. I only gave it up because there are health effects, similar to living in space for long periods, like weakening bones and cataracts. So generally guys work in this field for less than a decade before moving on to something less taxing on their bodies. Do you have a girlfriend? Would if I could get away with it? Can you describe some of those species to us? The strangest was the thing my buddy insisted must have been a Greenland shark. It had smooth gray skin like a dolphin, but a head that was like a stretched out spade, very triangular and streamlined with a dolphin-like jaw. It had a long tail and 4 flippers. Couldn't place it? Wasn't a fish, wasn't a mammal. Definitely a vertebrate. And definitely not a fucking shark, or a hallucination. Circled me 4 or 5 times like it was checking out the worksite, then swam off. Last I saw of it. I have a buddy in the Navy who told me about how he picked up a really strange sound on sonar that his commanding officer told him to ignore. Are there any sounds on sonar that you're also told to ignore? Loads. No way to identify them all. And never any willingness to pass it on to scientists lest they discover some endangered species or some shit that gets the site shut down. Okay, I was watching Ancient Aliens and I heard about this place in Japan, Yonaguni, Japan, that really appears to be man-made to me and many others, and then there's that Bimini Road that appears to be man-made. I also read the bloop was pinpointed to be like not far off from where the ancient city Thulhu ruled was described by H.P. Lovecraft. Thoughts on this stuff? Are you familiar with the bloop? From what I understand of it, and I could be wrong, it's allegedly made by a beast that makes whales look small. Do you think there could be a beast that large down there? Do you honestly believe that there's even bigger colossal creatures in the deep? Yeah, everyone's got their pet theory. I think it's just something really big we haven't seen yet. We could hunt it down but nobody wants to front the cash for it. I don't really buy into that kind of thing. I can't explain some stuff I've seen but I wouldn't jump to ETS as the first explanation for it. Do you honestly believe that there's even bigger colossal creatures in the deep? There's room in the ecosystem for maybe one more very large predator, alongside whales and colossal/giant squid. Probably something not closely related to either. We're living in the era when that question will be answered. Ocean Explo has really ramped up lately since James Cameron dove the Challenger deep. What are some of the man-made things you've seen that you can't explain? One job had me documenting wreckage near the equator, nice excuse for a vacation. Well into the twilight zone I saw clusters of big nets, bags, some kind of thin rubbery material, each holding down a huge bubble of air and glowing from some inside light source. Each one was restrained by a circular metal platform with legs. I assumed it was some kind of fish farm or sensor cluster or something. The footage was wiped, so I'm gonna go with Navy sensor cluster until I find out otherwise, i.e. never. OOPBTW, are you able to upload any other photos you've taken down there? Most important question, would you fuck a mermaid? Whoa, what the fuck is that in the picture? That's almost exactly what I saw. Head still off, tail should be longer, but the rest is dead on. Timestamp picture with your old scuba gear and or old diver's licensee. Done. My depth master and diver's Rolex. Was there ever a point when you thought you were legitimately in danger/threatened and not just scared? Yes. The only time I used a rebreather it malfunctioned. Afterward it was determined shock waves in the water from pneumatic tools we were using caused it, and that's apparently a known issue. I felt lightheaded, got tunnel vision, etc. and felt certain I was going to die. I can't explain it, that specific feeling, imminent death. I woke up inside the bell. Dive buddy dragged me from the work site back to the bell, and once topside they sent in medications through the Daco chamber's little airlock. Historically, the earliest rebreathers required that you actively look at the dials and control your own portions of oxygen and other gases. It had no computer of any kind to do that. Those early users must have been maniacs. How good was the pay? What skills do I need to become a commercial diver? $50 to $60,000. Very good money, although you realize why right away. Some can't handle it, others live for it. That's for 5 to 8 years. You're pressured to quit after that to avoid liabilities for your health issues, which will show up guaranteed if you keep doing it much longer. Learn to weld. That will widen greatly the number of jobs available. Also, there are loads of get certified quick in just X number of weeks programs. Avoid these, sketchy as fuck. A legit program will last most of a year. Generally speaking, decide ahead of time who you want to work for, then ask them directly what certification programs they look for. For fuck's sake, OP. Answer me. Has there been any documented incidents where divers of your kind has left nothing but a bubbling hose? Fucking gone? Like a shark ate them whole? I need to know. There have been deaths. In almost every case the remains were recovered. Nothing really approaches the awfulness of the Byford dolphin incident though, and probably nothing ever will. OP, did you have any lasting symptoms after you'd emerge, such as headaches or something? It's normal to come out a little bent. Never anything major. I'm made for it. Also, how was your work schedule? Did you dive like every day for about a month and then stayed on leave for some time? Yeah, depended on the job, but the 3 months on 3 months off schedule agreed with me. I didn't really have much to look forward to at home. Have you ever helped out in scientific/zoological studies? No, despite the shit we see, none of it is ever sent to marine bio researchers. Which is a huge waste. The oil and gas industry has insane resources. We spend 100 times more man-hours underwater. Just by sending them the footage we could advance the hell out of marine science. But we don't, in case they spot something that could shut down drilling for environmental reasons. And what is the largest creature you saw at work? The billowing sheet of rubbery white skin. So big I couldn't see the end of it, in any direction. It was hollow but had the illusion of tremendous mass. Did the dolphin-like creature look anything like this? Yes. That's it, exactly. But way smaller, about the size of a man, and pale gray everywhere. OP, do you dream of reincarnating into a fish? Nah. Dolphin, maybe. They're brothers. They come hang out with us and watch us work on shallow water jobs. Welding in particular captivates them. When and where is your next dive, OP? I quit, years ago. I'm an instructor now. You can't do deep sat diving for more than 5 to 10 years or your body starts falling apart from it. Do you know anyone that did that for over 10 years? What exactly happens to them? How would one get into being a commercial diver? Start from the end point. Figure out which company you want to work for, contact them and ask which training programs they favor for applicants. After that it's 6 to 10 months of training, then you're off to work. No. I'm fairly exposed as is. I don't know how much trouble I could actually get into for this, but I've heard stories. Stories do tell. Friend of an uncle's brother type of stuff. So and so talked about seeing military hardware on a dive and was never heard from again. Low probability of being legit, but caution is the friend of the wise. Do you think we will ever explore all the depths of the ocean, map it out, etc.? We're doing that now. Will technology ever be able to? About 5 companies are working on full ocean depth subs. Cameron beat them to it. The technology is now, provably, capable of exploring the entirety of the ocean even at the deepest points. What would we find down there? Truth is stranger than fiction. Something that could lead to technological breakthroughs. Already happening. New energy sources. Already happened, methane hydrate. Secrets of life? Some now think life originated around thermal vents. We're right on the brink. The answers we want hide in the deep. Info pics on here said only 10% of the depth has been explored. I thought. That's true. But it's also true that we're in the process of exploring it. You live in the right era to witness that process. Did you ever came to the brink of being desperate down there or otherwise witnessed a colleague almost losing it? On a few rare occasions. Keep in mind we're primates. Our instincts are suited for tracking prey across the savannah. Riding a steel capsule a quarter-mile undersea while breathing an artificial atmosphere. Then diving out into an enveloping cold dark abyss and trudging across powdery white terrain last seen by our ancestors hundreds of millions of years ago is about the most unnatural condition I can conceive of for us. What country you from originally? Do you believe helping the human race and others and not just yourself? You ever used computer to crunch data for science on a bionic project? If so, which one? Did you ever encounter UK Navy military personnel with nuclear or laser technology mini subs? Or heard UK underwater bases in North Sea? USA? Yes, no, And it's pretty much an open secret that the Navy is developing long-range recon and combat mini-subs in direct response to China's construction of nuclear-powered deep-sea mining bases. Don't take my word for it, that shit made the news. Oh. OP, how often do you tend to see bioluminescence down there? Can you actually just randomly look off into the darkness and see flashes here and there? Turn off your lights and once your eyes adjust, it's everywhere.